Really? We're really that powerful already? Harry's eyes widened. Hermione thought for a moment. From where I stand, even if Fred and George teamed up, they probably couldn't beat you and Ron together. The Weasley twins were considered top players among the fourth years and had that tricky twin fusion technique. Even against two fifth years, they might have a chance. But Harry and Ron, though limited in raw magical power and knowing fewer spells, had solid defenses, a lot of destructive force, and the tacit coordination born of long adventures and battles. With good teamwork, the twins really might have no effective answer. So we're already this strong, Ron crowed, delighted. He had never imagined the two older brothers who once seemed so untouchable could be within reach now. Hermione continued, more practically. Given your current progress in transfiguration, I really can't teach you animagus yet. She did the math out loud. There's not much time left in second year. This summer, I already promised Mrs. Weasley I'd spend the break at the Burrow. Harry's face brightened. Then why don't we all go? I'll talk to Mum. She won't mind. She'd be relieved to have one less child to look after all summer. He turned to Ron and Neville. What do you think, Ron? Mom will be thrilled, Ron said. She's great at cooking for a big family. He added with a grin, but don't expect anything fancy. It'll keep you alive, and that's about it. Neville hesitated, then said, My parents are busy. I'll probably be staying with Grandma at home. Maybe I could ask her to come to the Burrow? She's fierce, but she cooks well. Oh, Hermione laughed. I'll have to hurry to the Owl Tower and tell Mum to reserve rooms. So many people coming, she'll need to make space. Watching the three of them plan together, Hermione smiled. They'd known each other less than 2 years, but some quiet bond had already formed. The easy decision to stay at one another's houses, the lack of worry about being turned away. It felt like family. As the days passed, the next outdoor practical drew near. Dumbledore and McGonagall had been conspicuously absent from Hogwarts lately. People guessed it had something to do with the approaching Wizengamot session. In fact, the two of them had gone ahead to the Verdant Gorge to scout the site. They needed to ensure the safety and control of the upcoming trial. When Lockhart and the rest went through the portkey, Dumbledore planned to take direct control of the anti-apparition barrier so the Carrow siblings wouldn't escape if things went wrong. For a wizard of his caliber, the Carrow's magic was hardly a threat. McGonagall had quietly cleared several Fiendfire pits that were about to erupt and buried many transfigured stone statues underground as backups for possible emergencies. The Carrow siblings had been deliberately set up as a target on a table. Even if Harry and the others were overwhelmed, they would be instantly subdued by the two headmasters. Lockhart had lately grown unexpectedly serious. He'd contacted Professor Flitwick, claiming that the next outdoor practical would be wilderness survival for the second years and that he needed an experienced assistant. Flitwick rarely refused reasonable requests, and so agreed. Lockhart intended to go through the portkey to the gorge himself to deal with the Carrows and whatever else awaited, while Flitwick would stay behind to watch the students. At least, that was how Lockhart saw it. Just as those arrangements were in place and everyone waited for the outdoor practical, an unexpected commotion erupted in the Great Hall. Barty Crouch Jr. burst in, his face white with fear, a stretcher floating beside him. He was searching wildly for Dumbledore and McGonagall. I've already told you, the headmaster is not at Hogwarts at the moment, Filch said, frowning and trying to be polite. But my father is dying. It's the same curse as before. Dumbledore knows how to remove it. Barty Crouch Jr. shouted, veins standing out in his neck. Someone is casting curses at Malfoy Manor. Last time it was one elder. We thought it was contained. This time it's my father. He seized Filch's sleeve. Where is Dumbledore? How can I find him? When will he be back? Everyone craned to look. Lying on the stretcher was Barty Crouch Sr. His face was blackening and a foul smell rose from him. From hand to neck, black and purple patterns marred his skin, clearly the work of some terrifying dark magic. Barty Jr. forced himself to calm down and gasped, I know Dumbledore's method for removing this curse is rare and valuable, but there isn't much time. I'll pay any price for that secret. Please tell me where he is. Please. His eyes were red. He looked every inch the desperate son, clutching Filch's robes and refusing to let go. Mr. Crouch, I'm very sorry for your situation, Filch said softly. But truly, Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall are not here. I don't know where they are. Perhaps you could try Professor Potter or try Beauxbaton's infirmary, someone suggested. Barty shook his head violently. It's no use. Professor Slughorn has already seen him. All conventional measures have failed. He looked up, exhausted and determined all at once. I will do everything I can to keep my father alive. If Dumbledore returns, please tell me immediately. 162. Useless tricks. When Hermione stepped into the herbology office, several professors were already there. Professor Sprout, Lily, and Professor Flitwick, each of them had been present for Dumbledore's soul contract ritual. You sent a Patronus to fetch me, Hermione said, holding up the latest Daily Prophet. I suppose this is about Crouch? The front page showed Barty Crouch Jr.'s anxious face and Barty Crouch Sr. on a stretcher beside him, barely clinging to life. It's only just after lunch, and the rushed edition is already everywhere, she added calmly. The speed is incredible. To save his father, he's certainly used some connections, Sprout said, frowning. He's worried Hogwarts is guarding its secrets too closely and is trying to force us by stirring public opinion. From the outside, it's unsavory, but you can see the reasoning, Professor Flitwick agreed, perched on his raised chair with a cup of tea. Family ties are powerful. If the elder Crouch dies, the Crouch family's political momentum will be seriously damaged. Barty Jr. is nominally head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, but that's largely his father's doing, Lily added. If the elder Crouch doesn't recover, his son's position will be vulnerable. This all moved too fast, Sprout said. Old Crouch's network and influence probably didn't have time to transfer fully. Hermione couldn't help asking the question that had been nagging her. Could he have cursed his own father to force Hogwarts to hand over the method? To get what he wants? The three professors stared for a beat, then all shook their heads. You don't know him, child, Sprout said. He was a Slytherin, but a very brilliant student, O's in all 12 subjects. You don't get someone like that every year. I wrote to Professor Slughorn, potions professor back in my day, and he examined the curse on old Crouch personally, Lily said. It's beyond Barty Jr.'s handiwork. That degree of malice looks like Grindelwald's. If Slughorn says it's impossible, then it's impossible, Flitwick concluded. Hermione still looked unconvinced. But why would Grindelwald go to the trouble of cursing old Crouch? And he's not the only target. Barty Jr. came to Dumbledore at Christmas about another elder relative who'd been cursed. Somebody's aiming at the Crouch family. Likely politics, Sprout said. The pureblood families are fighting for power more fiercely than before. It wouldn't be unheard of for them to buy cursed items once owned by Grindelwald through unsavory channels. Piece by piece, the situation fell into place, and yet Hermione felt wronged by something deeper. Ultimately, his goal is the method by which Dumbledore sustained himself. Whatever lets Dumbledore return to his peak. That's the one thing we cannot give him. She paused. Dumbledore didn't remove that curse. He's dead. What remains is a ghost tied to his ashes. His transfiguration is powerful. So far, only Grindelwald seems to see through it. Even Voldemort, who fought him, didn't uncover much. Sprout shook her head. Even if we told Barty Jr. the truth, if he knew his father had to die and be bound to remain, he wouldn't accept it. Revealing Dumbledore's death would destroy the headmaster's mystique and be catastrophic for Hogwarts' reputation. And the ritual itself controls other people's souls, Hermione went on. I've spoken with Dumbledore. This must not fall into the hands of the pureblood families. Harsh as it sounds, old Crouch's life alone isn't worth the risk of letting that door open. They had called Hermione because she was now the youngest member of the school board, and the professors knew she needed to be involved. We can't tell him the truth, that's clear, Flitwick said hesitantly. But do we just stand by and watch? This is the worst of it, Lily said, frowning. Barty Jr. publicized it in the Prophet and put us on the moral back foot. If we don't help, we'll be savaged in the press, and it could jeopardize support for the school. After all the money that's gone into Hogwarts, leaders won't like seeing us stand aloof in a life-or-death situation. And he's made it a spectacle, so we can't handle it quietly. He's left us no easy way out. Hermione didn't much like Barty Crouch Jr. His political style grated on her, and she had never forgotten how casually he had treated her own attempted assassination by Dobby. Still, the professors generally thought well of him. An impression from his school years, perhaps. She walked a few paces, then looked up. "There are 2 days until the next outdoor practical," she said. "Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall will be back after that." They looked at her in surprise. The headmasters hadn't told the professors, yet they had mentioned it to a young board member. Hermione shrugged inwardly. She couldn't give everything away. She reached into her pocket and produced a small pouch. "These are the Phoenix tears Dumbledore gave me last Christmas. Send these to Barty Crouch Jr. They should at least slow the curse's progress." "If Dumbledore is back, he can examine old Crouch personally," Flitwick added. Sprout laughed and waved her hand. "You won't be paying for this out of your own pocket." "Silly child, the school keeps Phoenix tears for emergencies." "We called you in because you're on the board," Lily said with a teasing wink. "But I didn't realize Dumbledore put so much stock in you." Flitwick smiled. "It makes sense, though. If an enemy intrudes, and Miss Granger, the woman who controls the Philosopher's Stone, has authority, she needs the information." Hermione felt the three of them studying her, and she flushed with embarrassment. She could have dug a hole through the castle and hidden in it, but could offer no explanation. "Just hold on," she thought. "In 2 days, after I've dealt with the Caro siblings and the basilisk, I'll hand all of this off to Dumbledore." 163. The beginning of the trial. The Loire Valley in central France, once the heart of an ancient civilization, had been a land of beauty and abundance. After the war, everything that had given it life lay abandoned. Universities, palaces, vineyards, either in ruins or turned into battlefields. Mutated vegetation had swallowed the vineyards. Vast farmlands were left fallow and polluted. The Green Flame Party's fires had burned books of every kind, scientific treatises and novels alike, because their fiend fire could not be stopped by the fragile flame of civilization. Maddened Muggles had smashed the palaces of old kings, looting whatever looked valuable. The Loire itself, still flowing, had become a foul, toxic waterway. Green algae and silt hid dangerous water beasts that waited for anything foolish enough to approach. Yet the river remained the valley's most important water source, and the Muggles still stranded in the region, living in the last habitable pockets, mostly submitted to Green Flame rule. Wizards did not govern these people. Their duty was limited: drive away the most dangerous mutated beasts, and deal with spy Muggles sneaking in from the east with hazardous ideas. For everyday survival, the Muggles were left to fend for themselves, drinking water that remained toxic even after dozens of filtrations, eating deformed yet fast-growing crops with unknown effects on future generations, consuming meat laced with harmful substances. They were not permitted into the core areas of the Green Flame Party. Instead, they served as resources for expanding the party's territory, establishing strongholds for Grindelwald's domain. Only those who bore wizard children and became prestigious wizard families could hope for the right to move to New Paris. Hogwarts crouched at the river valley's edge, its heavy stonework seeming to wade in the muddy water. From within the castle, one could still sense a distant, watchful gaze 300 kilometers to the north. Grindelwald, the embers of old Paris staining the northern sky. Under that dark horizon, the flames seemed like eyes, indifferent and watching anyone who entered the territory. Fortunately, the Green Flame Party remained outwardly friendly toward wizard forces. Even where their ideologies diverged, they did not attack. The Dark Lord was convinced he represented the true future of wizards. If others could not see it, they would be persuaded in time. Whether members of the Order of the Phoenix or noble families like the Malfoys, the Green Flame Party contented itself with preaching and driving people away. Wizards did not fear them the way Muggles did. Lockhart had contacted a Green Flame official in the valley, a wizened man named Nigel, asking permission to bring students for outdoor survival training. Nigel squinted and agreed at once, even offering to arrange protection. Lockhart did not want that. He had no wish for the party to shadow the children the entire time, handing out pamphlets filled with wizard supremacy rhetoric. Besides, during the exercise, he planned to be away for a long stretch fighting a basilisk, leaving only Professor Flitwick in charge, a prospect that worried him. Still, the choice of the Loire Valley made sense. It was nominally under green flame control, so the danger was far lower than in true wilderness. There was no risk of fully armed Muggle soldiers suddenly charging out, nor of ungauged mutated beasts of 5x danger level. Because Professor Flitwick had let slip the plan during charms, the students all knew where they were going. This would be their first close look at a green flame settlement, and they were eager to see the Muggles living there. On the lawn, as the second years prepared to depart, only Lockhart, Hermione, and Draco exchanged a meaningful glance. "I'm terribly sorry, Lockhart," Professor Flitwick said apologetically, leaning on a custom broomstick fitted to his height. "The students had so many questions, and I let it slip." "It's only a bit of mystery," Lockhart said, uncharacteristically distracted. "I suppose they'll be happier knowing in advance." As Professor Flitwick said, today's class will be a half-day outdoor survival training near Angers, France. He looked out at the excited crowd. "We will not be returning to the castle for lunch today. Lunch will be in the valley, and you'll have to find it yourselves. The professor will guide you on how to obtain food and water in the wild, and how to process gathered ingredients safely." Ron scowled. "So we're supposed to eat deformed eels full of mud and giant berries with 5 bottoms?" Harry quietly patted the pocket that held the sandwiches and nut crumble bread he'd taken from the Great Hall that morning. "Don't worry. If it's really awful, I've got emergency rations." He had no idea Hermione had already arranged circumstances that might send him up against Death Eaters, leaving little time for cooking or eating. "Right, children, if you're ready, let's go. It'll be a long day." At Lockhart's command, they mounted their brooms and rose in single file. The valley felt different from the wilds they had seen before, the air warmer, the atmosphere controlled. From above, settlements rose on higher ground. Small wooden and brick houses gathered behind fences and walls, people like ants moving about. Wizards stood watch on the heights, and from time to time others cast warming charms toward the sky to keep the valley mild. Broom flyers passed by. Seeing the children led by Lockhart, they stared for a moment and said nothing before moving on. The Muggles worked in an orderly, if grim, fashion. Some went in small groups with buckets to fetch water. Others entered workshops where black smoke curled from chimneys, perhaps brickmakers or potters at work. Barbed wire circled some cultivated plots to prevent animals and starving people from stealing. The climate was mild and crops grew quickly, so outright starvation was rare. The problem was that the food was not necessarily healthy. Lockhart guided the students beyond the settlements toward a more remote area, closer to the wild. Draco rode his broom beside Hermione, she was flying using gravity magic, and mouthed, pointing to his arm, "There's a reaction." Hermione understood. The Caro siblings lurking in the valley had detected their approach and likely set up a portkey, moving on ahead. Green flame control over individual wizards was lax. Like the Order of the Phoenix, they paid little attention to the comings and goings of dark wizards. As long as someone did not openly declare themselves a core party member, patrolling wizards generally ignored them. Only when dark wizards caused major harm would arrests happen. A few scattered Muggle casualties usually went unpunished. 164. Separate actions. After another half hour of flying, they landed. The place was upstream from their earlier rendezvous, a gentle, wooded slope along the river. The broken terrain had kept Muggles away, the resources were plentiful, and there were no overly aggressive, mutated beasts nearby. Most important, it was close to the location the revealing charm on Draco's hand was pointing to. Still, they had to attend class first. Lockhart was being characteristically thorough. Though the day's business was urgent elsewhere, he refused to shorten the lesson or just go through the motions. He explained in detail how to select a suitable temporary shelter in the wild, how to erect basic protective magic, and listed common charms, peacekeeping charms, shield charms, Muggle-repelling charms, and silencing charms. "Let me remind you," Professor Flitwick interjected at the right moment, "all of those spells Professor Lockhart mentioned will be learned before 5th year, and they're all examinable." The announcement was met with a groan that rippled through the class. Lockhart went on to demonstrate techniques for detecting poisonous ingredients, identifying edible wild animals, and concealing the heat and smell of a cooking fire. Second years hadn't learned household and kitchen spells yet, so he covered basics like roasting, controlling smoke, and safe fire practices. Most of you have mastered the fire-making charm this year, Flitwick added, dealing another blow. The upcoming fire-building exercise will be a charms practical and will count toward your final grade. Immediately, students started silently practicing the incantation. Lockhart smiled helplessly. Professor, if you do that, they won't have the heart to listen to the lecture. Flitwick laughed. You asked for my help. I must make my presence felt. With a resigned chuckle, Lockhart kept going. How to obtain salt, variants of the water-making spell, and its restrictions. That was a little advanced for them. Before the war, the water-making spell had been taught in fourth year due to its subtleties. Finally, Lockhart clapped his hands. That's enough theory. The rest of the time is for practice. As usual, work in pairs or threes. He glanced pointedly at Draco and Hermione. All groups, disperse and search this area for anything usable, plants, animals, or go fish in the nearby Royal River. But be careful, many water creatures are fierce. Don't get dragged under. He then pointed at the two of them. Mr. Malfoy, Miss Granger, you two are a group. No one missed the intention behind that pairing. No one wanted Draco for a partner, and Hermione was too competent. If she teamed up with Harry and the others, the exercise would be pointless. Lockhart turned to Flitwick. Professor, would you mind patrolling nearby with me? I can't manage once the students disperse. Of course, said Flitwick. Maybe I can even sample their cooking. He flexed his metal hand with a conspiratorial smile. Hermione shot Lockhart a look that said she was holding him to his word, then led Draco away. They headed in the direction indicated by the revealing charm on Draco's palm. The L must stand for the professor, Hermione said, looking at the double-headed snake mark coiling on Draco's skin. This direction should be the portkey that leads to the basilisk and amicus caro. The G is clearly for Granger. That portkey should lead to electo caro. Let's go to the professor's side first, Draco said. He sounded worried. You'll be all right, right? A basilisk and a Death Eater, and that cursed object, it's aimed at Professor Lockhart. Lockhart had been affected by that cursed object since they'd left Hogwarts. The influence grew in moments of proximity and made him gradually worse. Hermione glanced at Draco. Are you worried about us? Draco flushed. No, I'm afraid something might happen to you, and I won't be able to explain it afterward. Hermione smiled with quiet confidence. Don't worry, we have a solid plan. The end of that sentence remained unspoken. The woods had no paths. Fallen trees and jagged rocks slowed them down. And before long, Lockhart caught up, joking about being delayed by dismissing those little gentlemen and little ladies. His perfect persona seemed to settle over him more firmly as they neared the danger. It shouldn't be far, he said. The mark on Draco's hand had darkened, nearly leaping from his skin. Rounding two boulders, they found a hollow carved into an old tree, and there, unmistakably, was the portkey. The Caros had clearly taken care to make the trap tempting. A transfigured stone statue of two young girls, sitting together and holding up a book, the first-year defense against the dark arts textbook, Countering Danger, a wasteland survival guide, had been fashioned into a portkey. Draco and Hermione recognized it at once. Are they mocking him? Hermione said. The author of the Wasteland Survival Guide is buried in the wasteland. Lockhart stepped forward, face hardening. That book contains bone fragments from my sisters, he said bitterly. Do they expect to intensify my curse, to make me foolish enough to grab it with my bare hand? His voice trembled with more than pride. He had begun to hear things, and his thoughts were frayed. He worked carefully with his wand, extracting the remains from the statue and sealing them away. Then he produced a potion and drank it, something to help resist curses. All right, he said, forcing a smile. The rest is up to me. Draco, you take Miss Granger to her portkey. Hermione didn't move. Instead, she turned to Draco. You go find Harry and the other two. Take them to touch the other portkey. Draco blinked, as did Lockhart. Wait, what do you mean? Hermione looked straight at Lockhart. Leave the dark wizards to the three of them, she said quietly. I'll go with you. You must be joking, Draco blurted. How can 3 second-year boys handle the Caros, even one of them? Hermione's expression was steady. This is their trial, as yours was when you had to master the brain closure technique in 2 months, she said, and the memory of that pressure stunned Draco. He had assumed Hermione's severity was aimed only at him for bringing the cursed object into the school. Now he realized she measured everyone by the same standard. Lockhart considered her for a long moment, then met her gaze. "Hermione, are you serious?" he asked. She nodded. "I believe in the three of them." Lockhart's face softened into a real smile. "Then I believe in you too." He turned to Draco. "Follow Hermione's plan. Go fetch Harry and the others. Let me, and the strongest second-year student Hogwarts has ever had, go meet the Slytherin basilisk." The portkey always felt awful, like someone had grabbed you by the navel and yanked, but Hermione was getting used to it. She even thought she might apply to learn apparition next year. When they landed, the landscape had changed completely. The ground was scorched and cracked, flanked by towering black cliffs that seemed to bleed a cold, dark glow. Honeycombed pits in the cliffs belched smoldering black smoke, the residue of fiend fire. A haze of burnt air drifted through the ravine. Even at the canyon floor, the scent was acrid. Amicus Carrow stood casually in front of them, idly tossing pebbles. He blinked when he saw two people. "Why are there two of you?" He looked at Hermione. "How did that brat Draco send you along too?" He grinned, malicious. "No matter. It just means Electo will have less fun." Hermione ignored him and scanned their surroundings. "Where's the basilisk? You're not expecting Professor Lockhart and me to go up against it alone, are you?" The narrow cliffs and the smoky sky might limit a hippogriff's movement and vision, but an Amicus was no match for Lockhart, especially now that Lockhart, though muddled by a curse, had already experienced one bad reaction and would not be caught completely unawares. Amicus was taken aback by Hermione's calm. "Lockhart told you everything?" he snapped. "Do you really think you can kill the basilisk together?" He assumed Lockhart had counted on Hermione's Philosopher's Stone bow and brought her along for its destructive power. That didn't make Amicus back down. He thought the cursed item would utterly cripple Lockhart soon. He snapped his fingers. Two pale little girls appeared at his side, hand in hand. Their fingers were missing two joints where they'd been split off earlier, and their dead eyes fixed on Lockhart. As they manifested, the potion Lockhart had swallowed began to fail, and the old symptoms returned. Dizziness, murmurs, hallucinations. Amicus smiled triumphantly. "If you want to see the basilisk, then see it." He opened his mouth grotesquely wide, his pale face stretching. A snake's head burst from his mouth, impossibly large, and the rest of the serpent followed like a train emerging from a tunnel. The wind from its emergence blew dust away. The giant snake coiled, dull greenish-yellow eyes glaring like a living hill, then crashed to the ground, sending up clouds of choking dust. "No wonder," Hermione said, thinking fast. "No wonder the professors couldn't find any trace of the basilisk. No wonder they could bring it into Malfoy Manor." Under Voldemort's transformation, this monstrous creature, 10 meters across in places, could hide inside a wizard's body. The orange-yellow pulsing she'd seen inside Amicus with her sky eye had been the basilisk's projection. "Careful, don't look into its eyes," Lockhart warned between suppressed whispers and spells, continuing to ward himself against the curse. "Priority is destroying my sister's skeletons. Without the cursed object, they can't hurt us." Then, suddenly, Hermione spoke. "Since everyone's here, there's no need to wait." Both Lockhart and Amicus froze. Without warning, a searing white, holy flame descended and incinerated the two ghost girls, reducing them to powerless bones that tumbled to the ground. Both men looked up toward the cliff through the black smoke and saw a figure standing there, radiating white light. The bright flame cut through the night-like haze and revealed the old man on the cliff. "Dumbledore!" they both cried, one in surprise, the other in forced terror. "It's a trap!" Amicus cursed. He spun to apparat away, but Dumbledore had planned for that. The anti-apparition permission was silently overridden. Amicus's reappearance point blinked into being right in front of Dumbledore on the cliff. The basilisk on the valley floor watched the luminous old man warily. It had nearly been killed by Dumbledore's heavenly fire outside Malfoy Manor. In the Albanian forest, it had watched the duel between Dumbledore and Voldemort in fear. Now, with the cursed object destroyed, Lockhart's condition cleared, and he wore a bitter grin. "Dumbledore knew all along? This was your plan?" Hermione nodded. Professor McGonagall and I knew too. Only the three of us. Lockhart gathered the scattered bones of the girls from the ground and put them in his bag. I feel like a clown, he said with a rueful smile. Hermione's tone softened. Not entirely. This is a trial. Everyone must face their own part. Lockhart jerked a thumb at the basilisk, which was occupied with Dumbledore. So my trial is this? Like Harry and the others facing Electo? Hermione hesitated and then acted. Before he could react fully, she sent a silent binding charm that wrapped around him. He had no time to dodge. He trusted her implicitly. It's not the showman you think who must face it, she said as she bound him. It's you. Lockhart's confusion broke into panic. Hermione, are you serious? You should know, she said. Your public persona is a timid, avoidant coward. He can't face this. The real you has been buried. She raised her wand. I'm using the magic you taught me against you. The memories of both personas are shared. Magic, combat experience. Your adventures were real. I'm not erasing your knowledge. I'm dismantling the false personality and waking the real man. You will face the fight yourself. Thanks to her successful animagus training and her moonform discipline, Hermione had the finer magical control to peel apart Lockhart's self-fashioned persona. The false Lockhart's consciousness blurred. The true, long-dormant Lockhart began to surface. His handsome face fell into a weary, defeated expression. Even in shock, he fit his memories together. He looked at Hermione with a small, nervous smile. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Granger. He spoke quietly, almost shyly. You shouldn't have done that. The real me can't handle the basilisk. Hermione released the binding charm and regarded him with something like pity. Nice to meet you, Professor. That's a problem you'll have to face. You should avenge your sisters yourself. Dumbledore's presence kept the basilisk focused on the cliff, giving Hermione time to finish. She produced another vial, the last bottle of the iron pot potion she'd completed before Christmas, now called Galatea's Tears. After giving one to Lily, this was the final dose. To face a basilisk's death gaze, Lockhart was still at grave risk. Hermione vaporized the potion into a mist and wove it around him. An ivory sheen crept across his skin. The drafty cloud would greatly raise his resistance to the gaze. If their eyes met, he would be badly hurt but not instantly killed. I should go check on Harry, she said, using a local gravity charm to lift herself into the air. I'll leave the basilisk to you. Don't disappoint your fans. And with that, she flew toward Dumbledore on the cliff. Atop the cliff, Dumbledore poured almost all his power into holding the basilisk's attention, pressing it so hard its reptilian instincts trembled and dared not look away. Amicus, who had apparated in before him, stood at the cliff's trembling, watching the frail-looking old man stare down into the ravine. He did not even consider running. The old wizard could subdue him with a single finger. Hermione floated up and landed a step behind Amicus, hacking as she pushed through the smoky screen. Cough, cough. Hasn't Harry come over yet? She asked. Electo's portkey had been set to the far cliff across the chasm. Dumbledore had placed an enchantment here to obscure that side's view, so the female Death Eater would still think everything was proceeding as planned. He shook his head and turned his gaze away. The basilisk was being kept in place. The next part of the ordeal belonged to Lockhart. Dumbledore had suspected as much. Hermione had told him Lockhart had two personalities, and now she was deliberately giving the other one the stage. The instant Dumbledore looked away, Amicus lunged at Hermione, taking advantage of the opening. From his point of view, the little witch was not particularly dangerous. If he could pin her down quickly, he could force Dumbledore to let him go. What met him instead was a whirling metal staff wrapped in Philosopher's Stone energy. Spin, spin, the technique whispered, one of the self-defense moves taught to the princesses of Carrion. The staff hovered, spun ferociously, and anyone it touched received a rapid combo of blows and a heavy knockback. A direct strike to Amicus's head left him dazed, followed by a barrage of spinning hits that sent him skidding and tumbling back toward Dumbledore. Purple arcs of lightning, carrying an oppressive force, pinned him to the ground. Gravity magic. Hermione stepped forward, put her boot on his chest, and stood shoulder to shoulder with Dumbledore. Minerva is already waiting on the other side, Dumbledore said. Harry and the others won't be in any real danger. Professors might stage a trial, but they would not let real harm come to students. At most, a scare. Hermione looked down at Amicus beneath her heel. Behave. If you want to live, shut up and watch. She had only cast a binding growth, and Amicus could have broken it, but he did not move. The power Hermione had shown was not what he'd expected. She had the speed to cast a spell the instant she stepped on him. Dumbledore stood right there. Any attempt to act would likely end him. Though his heart ached and he wanted desperately to warn Alecto, he could do nothing but watch the squat figure on the opposite cliff under the dim light. Alecto waiting for Hermione to be sent over by the portkey. Thick, dark smoke and miasma pooled like a black velvet curtain across the canyon. Below, the basilisk's heavy body hit the earth again and again. Amicus had released it. Lockhart had been caught. Everything seemed to be going to plan. Alecto's grin stretched into something sickening. The empty air before her warped, and 4 children tumbled out of the portkey in a heap. 4, she snapped, stunned. There should have been only 2, Draco and 1 other. She looked closer. Besides Draco, the other 3 were boys. Hermione was not among them. Draco, you failed again? Alecto's voice turned dangerous. How could he not even handle such a simple task? What was the point of bringing 3 useless second years? Draco scrambled up, dizzy. He had not meant to come. The Caro siblings' orders had only required him to touch the portkey, but worrying about his friends or some other impulse had made him touch it himself. He knew how dangerous this place was. If the Caros lost themselves in murder, they might not spare him. Regretting it now did nothing. He was there. Hermione and Lockhart went to the other side, he said, shaking his head. These 3 are for your entertainment. He tried for nonchalance and fell in behind Alecto. Legilimency confirmed his words. Alecto's smile grew. So that's how it is. That little girl is clinging to her professor. At that moment, Harry and the others pushed themselves up. Draco, is this what you meant about the portkey Dumbledore left? You lied to us? Harry demanded, glaring at the pale dark mark on the man in front of him, and then at the young Malfoy who stood with the Death Eaters. You've joined them. Ron and Neville went instantly on guard, shields shimmering and wand hands steady. Earlier, Draco had said Dumbledore had appeared, taken Hermione away, and left a portkey for Harry and his friends. Seeing a lone Gryffindor badge on the rock, the 3 boys had trusted him and followed without expecting treachery. Draco answered coldly. Lady Caro, these 3 picked on me most at school. I hope I can collect some interest before I go. Alecto cackled. Good boy. I do love helping with that sort of thing. Below them, the sounds of battle, explosions and roars, told them the fight had begun on the other side. Alecto did not hurry. Everything was under control. Even if Lockhart and Hermione had teamed up, they would not match Amicus and the Basilisk. Don't worry, she drawled toward the 3 boys. I'll make them regret what they did to you. Harry stiffened, eyes wide. You're Alecto Caro. I've heard your name. The Caro siblings had joined Voldemort. Their reputation had spread. Oh? Have we become that famous? Alecto's mouth twisted. You're a little late to the party. Arrogance and cruelty made her skip legilimency on the 3. She preferred the fresh sensation of inflicting pain rather than borrowing it secondhand. Harry, thinking fast, raised his hands as if surrendering. My mother is Lily Potter. If you don't kill us, taking us alive will be worth far more than killing us. Alecto glanced to Draco. Is that true? Draco hesitated, then answered with a sour face playing along. Yes, this is Harry Potter. His father was James Potter. They're all children of Order members, your enemies. Alecto's smile widened. If I capture you 3 and bring you back, Lord Voldemort will be pleased. The Order would be humiliated. So I can't kill them right now, she decided aloud. But Lady Caro, you promised I could. Draco began, his voice anxious and petulant. A red bolt of magic cut him off. Get some sleep. There's nothing for you here. Let me have a little chat with Master Potter's brat. Alecto casually cast Stupefy. Draco crumpled. Harry breathed a little easier and kept his hands raised, stepping slowly forward. Madam, I don't have my wand. See? My hands are empty. Alecto, even without probing their minds, could feel his nerves and tasted the delicious fear. She remained still, waiting for him to approach. After more than 10 seconds that stretched like an hour, Harry closed the last few paces toward her. I want to tell you, die, he shouted, and suddenly swung his raised hand down. There was nothing in his palm, but the air sang as if a blunt object cut through it. Alecto stiffened, the sound of impact snapping toward her like a promise. A bad feeling sprang up in his chest. The shield charm Harry cast in haste shattered and vanished as if struck by an invisible hammer. It hadn't even held for a moment. Alecto watched him. He looked as if he were swinging something invisible, and then several blows, like cannonballs, slammed into her chest. In the next instant, the Death Eater was flung backward, half her ribcage caving in. So weak? Hermione thought, watching from a distance. Maybe I overestimated the Death Eaters. The trip into the Forbidden Land had not been wasted. When Harry discovered the portkey had brought him to this strange place, he had quietly cast Invisibility Blade while lying on the ground and hidden his wand, prepared for an ambush from the start. It was a calculated opening against an unaware opponent. Alecto, however, had been careless about a child and had no experience dealing with a magically concealed wand. Even so, Harry's sneak attack was theatrical, almost melodramatic. If it had been Hermione on the receiving end, she would have disarmed him the instant he swung the chain. Alecto's first instinct, surprisingly, was to meet it directly with a shield charm, either overconfidence in her strength or a lack of battlefield experience. In any case, her hurried shield charm was far too weak. Even a Muggle air rifle might have punched through it. Hermione watched as the man at her feet shifted a few times, but she didn't move. Even the most hardened Death Eater would be affected by seeing a sister fall like that. Alecto hit the ground hard, a cloud of dust rising around her. She lay on her back, half her chest collapsed, a picture of certain death. The combination of Harry's practiced magical weapon and the blunt force of a steel chain had a terrifyingly destructive effect. Still, Harry didn't let down his guard. Ron and Neville hurried to his side, falling into the small formation they always used on expeditions into the Forbidden Land. Don't be careless. She might not be dead. Harry kept Invisibility Blade and his other spells active, eyes fixed on Alecto. The three of them fired in perfect unison. Stupefy, Expelliarmus, Petrificus Tollus, trying to end the threat completely. Alecto didn't go down that easily. Before their spells reached her, she dissolved into black smoke and darted away, widening the distance. Her condition, however, was anything but normal. A normal person struck like that would be dead. Even a wizard should have been incapacitated. Yet a faint, dark green light pulsed where her collapsed chest lay, somehow holding her together. She shouldn't have been able to stand, but she did. Hermione's breath caught. "It's the same glow I saw on the basilisk after I injured it," she said softly. The basilisk she had wounded that summer had a similar green light around its wound, enough to let a severely injured creature keep attacking. She had assumed that was a basilisk's modification, but now she considered that perhaps some Death Eaters shared the same trait. Alecto spat a curse and then, between rasped breaths, launched a Cruciatus curse. Ron was ready. His shield charm, layered and backed by a magical shield, deflected the torture curse outright. If he could reflect spells, Alecto would have been in serious trouble. "Vadim Vasi!" Neville shouted. A potion bottle shot from his wand like a bullet. Alecto shattered it effortlessly with a flick, but the mist from the potion spread and enveloped her. Neville had learned the trick from Hermione. Mix hallucinogenic plants like belladonna into an inciting spray, then use the spray to accelerate the effect. Even a whiff could be debilitating. Neville's role in the team was harassment and support. His job was to create openings for Harry. At the same moment, Harry had already lunged forward, casting a levitation charm on himself to lighten his weight. He moved as if stepping on the air, closing in on Alecto in an instant. He poured his full power into the chain, infusing it with magic until the invisibility blade could barely hide the intense glow. The translucent chain, like a streaking meteor, sliced into the mist. This time the impact felt different. A gust of wind cut through the potion fog and revealed Alecto within. The serrated tip of her wand glowed fiercely. A tough, thick barrier had been conjured to meet Harry's chain. It cracked under the force, but held. Black blood and broken tissue poured from her mouth, yet she grinned with cruel delight. "I'll make you die very painfully," she snarled. Stones at Harry's feet erupted into thorny wires and shot toward him, but he had already eased off his power and jumped back before they could wrap around him. Neville followed up, bringing his sword sheath down hard and smashing the pursuing thorns. Aletko's subsequent venomous hexes and curses came hot and fast, but Ron's defenses intercepted them. He stretched his shield work as far as he could, trying to buy his friends time. The three of them reformed and fell back, defending cautiously. Alecto, furious and humiliated at being bested by 3 second-year boys, abandoned subtlety. She poured out every powerful, poisonous curse she had as if she had an endless supply. Ron expanded his protective field desperately, shouldering as many of the blows as he could, but he was strained and on the edge of being overwhelmed. Harry and Neville were no slackers. They had been drilling shield charms too, and worked with Ron to bolster the defenses. Still, the fully enraged Alecto, ignoring her grievous wounds, pressed an adult's superior magical power down on them. The trio had no good way to counter and were forced onto the defensive, with no room to attack. Are all Death Eaters this hard to kill? Is Voldemort like this too? Hermione asked Dumbledore, thinking of how the Death Eater who had killed her had been pierced by reflected Avada Kedavra and gone down without a fight. Dumbledore's gaze never left the battle on the opposite cliff. I rarely deal with Death Eaters personally, he said quietly, but Voldemort is even more tenacious than she is. He can be split in half or thrown into raging fire and still keep fighting. He can be injured, Dumbledore added, and yet it doesn't seem to affect his actions, as if the injuries aren't really there. Of course, not every Death Eater they had seen last year had been like this. Many were fragile, felt real pain, and could be killed by a single lethal curse. Perhaps only an elite few had this unnatural resilience. On the bare rock of the cliff, Alecto looked like a terrifying specter, short and stocky, chest half caved in, back slightly hunched, spitting dark magic with a vicious tone and closing on the three boys step by step. They could only defend an inch back. Has the potion mist not taken effect? Harry cried over the storm of spells as he worked to keep them all alive. Neville hacked away another incoming curse with his sheath, frowning. I think it's taken effect, he panted, but it's not doing much. Should we stop? They've done very well already. A tabby cat Patronus materialized silently beside Dumbledore and the others. McGonagall's voice came from within it. Hermione shook her head. This is just the beginning. They still have energy. We can watch a bit longer. The cat disappeared, and the three on the cliff fell silent again. A continuous rumble echoed up from the valley below, but neither Hermione nor Dumbledore paid it much mind. A basilisk without wizard assistance, and with most of its deadly gaze problem solved, would at least be able to protect itself. Lockhart, even if weakened by a different core, was still a threat. We can't keep defending passively. We need an opening, Harry shouted. Deflecting spells was draining them all. Taking advantage of a vicious entrail-expelling curse aimed his way, he rolled out of Ron's protective range. Plan B. Neville bolted forward from the other side, while Ron charged, shield held before him. On both flanks, Neville blended crude medicinal mists with his awkward cloud of concealment, forming a fog wall to block Alecto's view. Harry swung in a half-arc and charged too. He'd bought a can of inciting spray from Hermione and slammed his chain into the ground. Then, with transfiguration, he turned the dust into sparkling glitter and blew it toward Alecto, using the glitter as cover to advance. Of the three, only Harry's transfiguration was truly combat effective. Alecto didn't panic at being attacked from 3 directions. Harry was the obvious main threat. That invisible chain of his was powerful enough that even a fully cast shield charm struggled against it. The boy with the shield in front was hardly a threat. Neville, the stocky boy on the right, used poison and crude sword work, but it wasn't affecting her. She could feign being entangled, then kill Lily Potter's son and slowly deal with the other 2. She lashed out with her wand. Earth and stone rose to form a cage that trapped Ron inside. She flung spells blindly at the spreading medicinal mist, pretending not to know Neville's exact location. On the left, with a flick of her hand, she conjured a gust that blew away the glitter, revealing Harry behind it, chain raised. A dangerous, twisted smile crossed her face. Her wand flared green. Avada Kedavra! A flash of pure, killing magic shot straight out. The air around her trembled as if something hidden were about to move. But Harry, as if predicting it, rolled aside and smoothly dodged the curse. The air calmed. What? Alecto was stunned. In theory, Hogwarts dueling lessons taught that a well-timed roll could dodge a killing curse, but in all her years with the Green Flame, and as a core Death Eater, she had never seen anyone actually do it. Many had tried and died. The killing curse without protective wards was brutally final. To see a second-year dodge one, cast by her no less, left her momentarily aghast. Hermione couldn't help the pleased smile that crossed her face. Harry's combat sense was extraordinary. She herself would have preferred a safer technique like Carrion Retaliation to deflect it. Dumbledore's eyes shone. Even Amicus, pinned beneath Hermione's boot, gaped speechless. In that instant of Alecto's shock, Neville burst from the fog, a sting on his forehead where a curse had grazed him, eyes fierce. He slashed with his sword set, but Alecto had already strengthened herself with a body-bind curse. Neville's blow was weak. His magic wasn't enough to break her defense. She began to cast another killing curse, this time aiming for the gap after Harry's roll, when he wouldn't have time to adjust. But before the curse could fire, a scorching blade of bright blue light slashed down from behind. Alecto's shield charm split and shattered. Neville's Carrion Swiftblade fluttered uncertainly for a moment, like a low-power glow, and then steadied. Alecto's alarm grew. She stopped the curse mid-cast and turned to deal with Neville, assuming she could finish him quickly. Then an unexpected spell smashed into her. Cruciatus! Draco's cool voice came from the side. He had quietly risen, and exploiting the moment Neville broke her shield charm, hurled a newly learned Cruciatus at the woman who had taught him. Alecto's scream split the air. Though Draco didn't try to prolong the torture, it was enough to wrench her focus and slow her reactions. Neville roared and poured every ounce of magic into the Swiftblade. The blue light stabilized and came down in a clean arc. Like a hot knife through butter, Alecto's wand-wielding arm fell to the ground, smoking and charred. Harry, covered in dust, grinned at her distorted face. This time, I'm the support. With tactic and timing, Neville, who had learned the Swiftblade, could take the lead sometimes even if he couldn't match Harry's raw attack power. They switched roles fluidly. Whoever could get close would strike as the primary attacker. Though Neville's magic had almost failed them, Draco's intervention had supplied the decisive edge. Ron, freed from the earthen cage by a transfiguration, charged like a bull, shield raised. He seized Alecto's wand from the smoking severed hand and rolled away to create distance. A wizard without a wand could still fight, but they were dramatically weaker. Impedimenta and Petrificus Totalis. Harry and Neville's spells followed in quick succession. Alecto was rendered helpless and frozen in place. Phew, solved. Neville wiped sweat from his brow and winced as he touched the burn on his head. We beat an adult Death Eater. Harry couldn't hide his excitement. Hermione said we could only handle fifth years. We took down a Death Eater. Ron waved Alecto's wand triumphantly. On the cliff above, Hermione glanced down at Amicus under her foot with a hint of disappointment. Your sister is so weak. I thought she might put up more of a fight. Amicus, trembling on the ground, whether from humiliation, sorrow, or fear, managed a few words. My sister's better at interrogation and planning. Being bested by 3 second-year students was hardly less humiliating than Lucius's capture by Hermione alone earlier. Hermione looked to Dumbledore. How about we throw him over and have an encore? Dumbledore chuckled. That's enough. You can't very well have Harry endlessly rolling to dodge the killing curse. Come on, we'll meet up with Minerva and explain everything to our little heroes. 169. Goblin and Fiendfire. You weren't stunned? Ron demanded, glaring at Draco. They had just watched Alecto strike him with a stupefy right in front of them. Draco's expression was unreadable. He tapped the Slytherin badge pinned to his chest. Hermione's Christmas present. There's an anti-spell charm behind it, a stored stupefy. The charm had indeed countered Alecto's curse, but Draco had made a deliberate choice to play dead and drop to the ground. A decisive move at the critical moment. Harry, however, hadn't lowered his guard. He held the chain taut and pointed at Draco. Which side are you really on? What were you trying to do, working with Death Eaters to trick us? If Draco's answer didn't satisfy him, the heavy iron ball at the end of the chain would very likely split his skull. But the blond boy remained silent. Just as Harry's patience was about to snap, Professor McGonagall appeared out of thin air, and Dumbledore followed, arriving by apparition with Hermione and Amicus in tow. "I'm very sorry, children. This was a trial," Dumbledore said, taking the blame as he'd said he would. "We didn't tell you the whole truth. We meant to test how you'd react in a sudden crisis." He added that the scheme had originally been Voldemort's, but at his suggestion, the professors had chosen not to expose the plot immediately and had used it as a lesson for the students instead. Hermione didn't want Dumbledore to shoulder all the responsibility and stepped forward to explain. Professor McGonagall stood nearby. She said nothing, but relief softened her face. Harry's eyes flicked to Amicus, bound tightly and kneeling, and then to Alecto, who lay immobilized and bound, missing an arm. He couldn't help grinning. "This is brilliant." "But Hermione, you should have given both Death Eaters to us," Ron crowed. "This woman is too weak and too careless," Harry crowed back, puffing himself up shamelessly. Even if both of them had attacked together, they'd probably only have caused a little trouble. Only Neville scratched his head and smiled awkwardly. Hermione cut him down without mercy. "Alecto Caro isn't a combat-focused Death Eater. If her brother had been here, you wouldn't have lasted more than a few rounds of spellfire. And your clever disguise, why did you shout it out? Who taught you that bad habit? Ron, when you charged straight in, you didn't watch your footing, so you were easy to trap and couldn't keep up with the team's rhythm. Neville, your sword magic is still clumsy. If Draco hadn't helped you at the last moment, you might even have been killed." She listed every small mistake the three had made. "You were fighting a seriously injured Death Eater because of carelessness. I'm beginning to wonder whether your special training these last few days has done anything at all." Guilt washed over Ron, Harry, and Neville. From another angle, maybe Hermione had a point. Their performance had been merely adequate. McGonagall, unusually gentle, intervened. "Don't be too hard on yourselves," she said. "This was the most exciting second-year practical combat exercise I've seen. Apart from you, Hermione. The teamwork, the clever use of spells, and Harry's incredible role. Honestly, at that moment, I had already planned to step in." Dumbledore was about to say something when he paused and smiled. "It seems we underestimated the other professors. Your disappearance was noticed almost immediately by Phileas." He lifted the anti-apparition ward with a flick of his hand. With a soft pop, Professor Flitwick appeared in midair. Before he could land, he flickered like a tiny ball of energy and reappeared a little further away. His silver prosthetic hand gripped his wand as he took in his surroundings with cautious, anxious eyes. "Sorry, Phileas," Dumbledore joked. "We gave you a little pop quiz." Flitwick took in the scene, the two headmasters, Hermione, 4 boys, and 2 bedraggled-looking Death Eaters, and looked bewildered. First Lockhart and Hermione had vanished, then Draco had sneaked off, calling to the Gryffindors. Flitwick had checked students' spell proficiency, only to find many missing. Following traces of a tracking charm, he detected the signature of a portkey, and as the top charms professor, he had no trouble tracing its destination, until the anti-apparition ward had blocked him, that is, until it had been lifted moments ago. "We can sort out the details once we're back at school," Dumbledore said. He looked to the empty hillside beyond them. "The gentleman hiding over there, you can show yourself now." Someone else had been lurking, and neither Dumbledore nor McGonagall had noticed. Everyone turned to the empty, scorched earth. A short figure appeared, as if a blob of paint had been flicked down from the air. A goblin stood there. He wore intricate silver armor, not medieval-looking, but more like Muggle power armor, with complex gears and transmission parts. It wasn't steam or nuke-driven. A faint silver light ran beneath the plating, a style oddly similar to Flitwick's prosthetic hand. "Hello. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but you were fighting near the Goblin Cavern," the goblin said in a calm voice. No one loosened their grip on their wands. In this era, tensions between wizards and goblins were high. "That's Gornook," Phileas exclaimed, recognizing the goblin instantly. It was hard for humans to pick out goblins from one another, but the half-goblin charms professor could. No need to be alarmed. Gornook is with the Coexistence faction. The second years had learned about the Coexistence faction, a small, ostracized group of goblins who advocated integration with humans. Flitwick added, relieved, "He helped me make this prosthetic hand." The room's hostility eased considerably. As a half-goblin professor, Flitwick wasn't favored by either side. That Gornuk had assisted him spoke volumes. Gornuk gave a rueful little shake of his head. Yes, cowardly Gornuk, that's what they call me. Why are you here, Mr. Gornuk? Dumbledore asked gently. Gornuk pointed toward the cliffs, where explosions and rumbles still echoed. As I said, you were fighting right above the goblin cavern. You blocked apparition while you fought. So the rumors of a goblin cavern here were true, McGonagall said softly. There had been whispers that this scorched area had once been torched by the Wizengamot because of a goblin stronghold. It was the goblins themselves who leaked the location, Gornuk said evenly. The extermination faction believes we've betrayed the goblin race, so they gave the location of our greatest hidden realm to the Wizengamot. Under these caves lies the Coexistence faction's largest independent secret realm. If it's destroyed, Ragnarok II will be able to crush the neutral reclusive faction and unite all goblin forces. Didn't the Wizengamot's fiendfire destroy the goblin cavern? Hermione asked. If Gornuk was here, the realm couldn't be entirely destroyed, but Lockhart had claimed that land burned by fiendfire couldn't be rebuilt. Fiendfire was terrifyingly similar to frenzied flame, she thought. Gornuk sighed. Not completely, only temporarily not. Flitwick peered down toward the smoke-choked ravine. What's happening down there? It looks like some giant creature has gone mad. Oh, that's the teaching qualification exam we prepared for Professor Lockhart, Dumbledore replied dryly. So even the professor was part of your trial. Hermione, you really outdid yourself, Harry shouted, eager. Let's see how Gilderoy performs. Dumbledore waved his hand and summoned a gust of wind. The dense smoke that would have blinded ordinary wizards peeled away as if brushed aside, and the battle below burst into full view. Watching Hermione rise into the sky without looking back, disappearing into the smoke, Dumbledore let his oppressive stare fall away. The basilisk finally turned its massive head and fixed its gaze on the only person left, Lockhart. He felt something tremble inside him. Before their eyes met, an aura of death seemed to wash through his bones. Instinct took over. He darted to the right, and in the next heartbeat, the giant snake's head smashed into the spot he had just occupied. The attack had come without warning. If his body hadn't reacted on instinct, he would have been crushed. Lockhart struggled to reconcile the feel of it. Had this body been trained to move like this? In the 10 years he had been dormant, the personality that now inhabited this form had adhered to all its plans faithfully. Power, polished menace, innumerable battles. Those memories weren't just in the head, they were carved into reflex. He knew, somewhere, not to meet the basilisk's eyes. He remembered the tactics the original self had used against the beast, but the person inside him now did not possess that same iron will. Mere thoughts of the basilisk's yawning mouth made him quake. He reached for the wand case strapped to his back and recoiled as if electrocuted. 10 years had passed. Touching that wood felt like touching his mother's hand again. An almost physical nausea, a spasm in his throat, a sudden welling of inexplicable sorrow and bitterness. Forget it! Forget it! He told himself, shaking his head hard. With a flourish of his cloak, the hippogriff he had summoned appeared at his side. The creature immediately registered that Lord Voldemort was wrong. The scent that had once been bold, fearless, almost radiantly sure was now laced with unease, hesitation, and a kind of cowardice. Underneath it, a deep sadness. The hippogriff snorted, confused, but the familiar pressure of a hand and voice kept it from resisting. Lockhart swung up onto its back smoothly, easing the reins as if he'd ridden it 100 times, testing the familiar give of its sides. When he squeezed its flanks, it shot forward like an arrow. The basilisk pursued relentlessly. Its enormous body shattered stone and outcroppings as it barreled down the valley. Perhaps because of Voldemort's former orders, it seemed to hate Lockhart particularly. It sought to kill him. Lockhart couldn't climb higher, though. The fiendfire black smoke wasn't lethal to wizards who held their breath and rushed through, but a hippogriff's great lungs would gulp that poison and die. He realized, with a jolt, that if he tried to fly into the smoke, he would endanger the beast, and without the hippogriff's speed, his own magic might not be enough to shake the basilisk off. He drew the long sword at his waist, but that steel was useless against the creature's hide. He didn't dare touch the wand on his back again, so he cast wandless magic instead. forcing open sheets of thick fog along the cliff faces to hide their tracks. The basilisk, however, still trailed them by heat alone. Had the hippogriff not reacted instantly, they would have been flung into the rock. Lockhart gasped, staring at the torn cliff behind them with his heart pounding. The other version of himself, brave, ruthless, would have counterattacked without blinking. But this Lockhart, despite the volume of spells he could name, had a fragile will. The sight and roar of the basilisk made him tremble. With a sharp hiss, the beast struck, spraying deadly venom as the hippogriff turned. He finally forced himself to draw the short wand from his back. A rough shield charm protected his flank. The hippogriff twisted and barely avoided the worst of the venom. The remaining spray sizzled against his shield like acid. "No, there's no way we can beat a basilisk," Lockhart shouted, urging the hippogriff to climb so the snake would have to follow up the cliff. The creature looked at him with bafflement. Why had Lord Voldemort been dodging, not fighting back? They had dueled outside Malfoy Manor before. This hesitation made no sense. The basilisk coiled at the valley's bottom and lifted its head, its mouth bent in a strange, twisting grin. The green in its eyes flared. An invisible ripple of sound rolled from its throat as it contorted. The hippogriff could not hear it, but Lockhart could. It was like a curse, or the summons of the dead to the living. The basilisk had eaten the remains of his sisters. Using that last awful link, it poured some kind of spell into him. The idea that a bewitched magical creature could cast curses at a distance made his skin crawl. Two dark, greenish shapes seemed to form inside the beast's gaping maw. They whispered his name, soft and coaxing as his vision began to blur. The figures became clearer with each syllable. "Little brother, come quickly, little brother. Your sisters miss you so much." Sad voices echoed up from the valley bottom, hollow and relentless, growing louder in Lockhart's ears. He felt his balance slip. He couldn't listen to them. "Muffliato," he snapped, plastering a muffled shield onto his own senses. But blocking the sound barely helped. Dizziness attacked him, and he knew that if he blacked out, he would plunge to his death. Even a coward clung to life. He forced breath into his lungs, tightened his grip on the wand, and pointed it at the basilisk's maw. He fired off a trio of blasting curses in rapid succession. "Confringo! Confringo! Confringo!" Explosions thundered through the canyon. The wailing voice sting faltered, but when the dust and smoke cleared, the basilisk's massive head loomed there, unhurt. Despair washed over him. His spells had no effect on that hide, which seemed to absorb or shrug off ordinary magic. Yet somewhere in his memory was a counterspell, a name and a form that did harm. Loretta's great bow, Hermione had taught him. It was a spell named for someone he had never heard of, but its force had been beyond anything he'd expected. The problem was it required time to charge, and his current nerves screamed that he had no time. Every consideration turned against him. Every part of his mind pushed to give up. A small, traitorous thought slipped in. Maybe Dumbledore would see he couldn't win and would finish the basilisk himself. At that moment, a gust whipped the black smoke aside. Lockhart and the basilisk both looked up. On the cliff edge, a group had gathered and watched them. Dumbledore, McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, and the familiar faces of the students. Hermione, Draco, Harry, Ron, Neville. They stood together, eyes fixed on him, concern plain on the adults' faces. The students watched with a mixture of adoration and trust, their gazes bright with belief in the man they thought he was. 171. The courage of cowards. "Professor, blast that ugly snake!" Harry shouted, waving his chain, his eyes fixed on the man and the basilisk who had paused their fight below. McGonagall quickly pushed the children's heads down. "Don't look at the basilisk," she warned. Lockhart looked up at the students in surprise. He couldn't hear Harry through the Muffliato charm, but he read the general meaning from his lips. At that moment, he felt the silent restriction on apparition lift. If he wanted, he could vanish at once or climb the hippogriff and fly straight out of the canyon. The smokescreen Dumbledore had created was already dispersing. But stared at by the children, something in him hesitated. The revered face of Dumbledore, Hermione's hopeful expectance, McGonagall and Flitwick's concern, and those young faces still flushed from battle. My students. Did they really beat the Death Eaters? He had the memories of his polished, perfect persona intact, so he even knew that Hermione had left Electo to Harry and the others. A twist of feeling filled him, softening into a surprised sigh. They've grown up so fast. Some stirring warmed him from within. A strange, invigorating warmth flowed through his limbs. He felt less like the same coward who had tried to run. Whether it was the teachers or the students present, he couldn't name the source of the courage, but their presence eased his fear. Below, the basilisk, wary of Dumbledore's return, roared and turned toward the cliff, but Dumbledore simply watched. For Lockhart, the world narrowed to a single, silent pantomime. He drew a long breath and patted the hippogriff at his shoulder. "Good partner, you'll help me, won't you?" The hippogriff snorted and answered with a long, resonant cry. Lockhart felt his own chest lift. Come on, he urged himself. When the basilisk glanced back at him, he made himself look away. "You still get scared," he told his own heart. The hippogriff stamped and dodged as the basilisk lunged. Lockhart tightened his grip on his short wand, tapped it, and cast the familiar sharpening charm. Then he slashed at the falling rocks to clear a path. The basilisk's huge head reared up again. Lockhart's pulse hammered like an actor stepping on stage for the first time. He flung out a couple of blinding hexes, but the creature barely trembled. A thin gray film washed over its eyes and faded. Its resistance to ordinary spells is too strong, he thought, despair prickling at the edges. He had kept his wand wrapped in wood since he was a student, partly to hide its aristocratic look, partly to avoid touching the bone that formed part of it. That layer had always made his magic feel slightly removed, never quite wandless, but never direct either. Now he clenched his jaw. Maybe it's time. He crushed the wooden casing with a burst of will. The short wand inside came free, white bones streaked with what looked like dried, bloody tears. The sight sent a shock through him. Memories flooded back. His mother, bloodied, pinning him down, the choking silver images of terror, and the dark house, his sisters watching silently from windows as the sound of bones being chewed drifted out. A voice in his memory screamed, "Run!" This time he did not run. He swallowed hard. "If I could go back, what would I do? Sisters, I'm coming to save you." A tear slipped from Lockhart's eye. He wiped it roughly with his sleeve and roared, launching bombarda after bombarda to blast through the rain of venom the basilisk spewed. The hippogriff looped and twisted, climbing away from the snake's gaping maw. Lockhart kept his eyes shut when upside down, refusing to glimpse those terrible eyes. Transfiguration answered him. Jagged stone pillars shot from the cliff walls and smashed into the basilisk's head, making it real. He was not finished. More bombardas split the cliff. Huge slabs of rock tumbled like an avalanche, exposing hidden caverns below. From those blasted openings surged the fiend fire that had long burned inside the mountain. Fire snakes and fire horses poured out. The hippogriff narrowly avoided them, ferrying Lockhart away to safety. His hands and lips trembled. His extremities tingled from hyperventilation. He tried to slow his breath, but the shaking persisted. He had to regulate himself, or his wand work would falter. He downed a bottle of calming draught. It was hardly ideal for the moment, but it steadied him enough. "Well fought, Professor," Harry called from above, wishing he could come down. The basilisk was buried under a mass of rock, but pushed itself free, unhurt. Its keratinized scales were like living armor. Neither conventional magic nor brute force tore it open. Lockhart watched the fiend fire spilling from both sides and had an idea. He didn't aim to extinguish the flames, he wanted to redirect them. "Finite incantatum," he cried, steering the inferno toward the snake. The oncoming black flame struck the basilisk's face. It hissed and writhed in pain, but the fiend fire failed to injure it. Voldemort had altered that hide and steeped it in dark magic. Each strike only seemed to make it blacker, shinier, tougher. "I think its defenses are stronger than over the summer," Hermione observed, frowning. "Even Loretta's great bow might now do no more than tear open flesh, not tear the creature apart." "Voldemort has one of the best potions masters," Dumbledore said quietly. "He would have spared no resources on this basilisk. Each time it heals, it grows harder in response." Gornik the Goblin muttered from the sidelines, watching intently. The basilisk surged free of the fiend fire and lunged, jaws opening to bite Lockhart. Now Lockhart moved with a calm he had not felt 10 minutes before. With the hippogriff's evasive rolling and two large boulders, he transfigured their faces into a pair of metal rings. They snapped onto the area around the basilisk's eyes and fused together, forming a tight metal shroud that sealed the creature's vision. Phew, first blind it, Lockhart breathed, surprising himself with his own steadiness. Fiendfire's failure to harm the snake still stung, but the calming draught had slowed his heart, and the knowledge of the children's eyes on him lent a painful sort of pride. He couldn't give in to panic. Next, break its defenses, he told himself. Find a way to use Loretta's great bow. There's no room for mistakes. And remember, the basilisk can sense temperature. 172. The great bow of the cowardly knight. The great snake thrashed violently, its steel eye mask clamped so tight that it battered its head against the rock wall, trying to shatter the metal. Lockhart kept turning stones to steel, fusing them to the mask until its thickness increased and the metal started creeping over the snake's mouth. But the basilisk's struggles were ferocious and relentless. "Professor, don't forget the Christmas gift I gave you," Hermione shouted from the cliff, but Lockhart could not hear her. Earlier, he had silenced himself and, intent on sealing the basilisk, he had no time to look up. The sightless snake hunched, tasting the air with its tongue. It found Lockhart, reared back, and lunged headfirst. Lockhart broke off his casting. The hippogriff beneath him carried him back in a blur, while he traced a circle with his wand and softened the ground where the basilisk would land into a mud pit. The serpent plunged in with a grunt, its head buried up to the neck in muck. The mud wasn't deep, only enough to trap its head. But Lockhart's next spell burst from his wand in a spray of icy wind and snow. A reinforced freezing charm crawled up the scales, frost flowers blooming on its hide, but the cold could not yet stop such a massive creature. Hermione watched, frowning. The narrow canyon, the basilisk's determination, and its startling speed left Lockhart no room to draw his bow properly. The basilisk itself isn't a match for him if he gets his confidence, she thought, but that skin, he can't get through it. Dumbledore asked softly, "Is there anything special about your Christmas gift?" "I gave him a sword oil, brewed under Professor Lily's guidance. With his sword, it might be able to break through the basilisk's softer parts." Hermione's voice drifted down, and this time Dumbledore's whisper reached Lockhart, despite the silencing charm. He removed the charm at last, hung his long sword on the hippogriff's saddle, and reached into the leather pouch at his hip. Sword oil. Oxio. A parcel of grease wrapped in craft paper flew through the air and into his hand. He smeared it along the blade, pulled a thin string, and the gray lump melted, spreading and covering the edge. "Peerless edge!" he cried, pouring his strongest sharpening magic into the sword. The blade flashed, a strange argon mist wreathing it. Lockhart surveyed the basilisk. Every scale was like iron except where the mouth opened. The only vulnerable spot he could find was the upper palate. He hesitated. Rushing into that cavernous maw could be the death of him and the hippogriff, but the basilisk gave him no time. Unable to break free from the mask, it abandoned sight and reopened its jaws, and with that, the familiar hallucination that always accompanied its curse returned, two shimmering green figures forming in its throat. Sisters. The old pain and delusion clawed at him, the headache, the voices. He steadied himself. "This time I won't be afraid." He swallowed, hiding the fear, prodded the hippogriff forward, and made his move. He chilled his body with a gust of cold so the basilisk's sense could not pick him up, then slid, almost silently, toward the yawning mouth. The hallucinations doubled, the curse power scraping at his mind, but he forced himself on. "I can't let you take risks for me," he murmured to the phantom sisters. Close enough now, he popped off the hippogriff's back and apparated into the basilisk's mouth. Despite splitting pain and the layers of illusion, he landed exactly where he meant to. Two faint shadows stood in the darkness of the throat, their faces like those he remembered, yet they were only the curse taking the shape he feared most. Lockhart did not allow himself to be fooled. He drove the sword upward. The blade slipped through flesh and bone, and then, with a cry, it punched through the basilisk's upper palate. The snake lashed its jaws shut in a roar. At the last instant, Lockhart apparated back onto the hippogriff. He stared down at his hand and saw a long cut where a fang had grazed him. His sword, already greased, remained embedded in the beast's mouth. The The serpent's venom began to climb his arm, but he had a bottle of antidote ready and poured it onto the wound. It would only slow the poison, but Galatea's tears, her potion, helped too. "Obliviate! Obliviate! Obliviate!" he cried, driving the hypnotic oil's effect to its limit. He hammered the basilisk with his strongest memory charms, while the drought of living death, poured and lodged near the creature's brain, cooled its savage will. The living death numbed the pain and dulled the beast's awareness. The memory charms came in wave after wave, eroding thought and memory until the basilisk staggered. Its mind became sludgy, groggy as if the sea itself had pressed down on it. At last it swayed and crashed to the ground. "It's not over yet," Lockhart muttered. The venom had frozen his left hand to the bone, but the antidote and Hermione's potion kept him functional. On the cliff, McGonagall, ready to go down, hesitated. "Gilderoy is nearly done for. We must go down and save him," she said. Dumbledore said nothing. Flitwick and the children clung to their robes and watched. Hermione caught McGonagall's arm. "Don't you believe in Professor Lockhart?" she demanded, eyes blazing. "I want him to come down as much as you do, but this is his fight. He's not only killing the basilisk, he's killing his past self. We should trust him, like you trust me." Persuaded, McGonagall stayed. On the hippogriff, Lockhart lay nearly prone, holding on to the creature's neck. "Fly a little higher," he whispered. The hippogriff snorted as if resentful, then climbed. He had only one chance left. The venom ate at him, his fingers were numb. But the children and the professors watched, and in his mind his sisters' phantom faces urged him on. On his poisoned hand a bluish glow began to gather. "Mother, watch properly," he told a faraway image. He forced the light into shape. In his frozen hand, the great bow began to form. Even as his fingers went purple and the cold bit deeper, he clenched his teeth and held it together. A single scorching blue arrow took form, the canyon filling with a cold electric wind that painted the rocks azure. The basilisk lay in a drugged sleep, but pain had already begun to edge into it. Lockhart had to strike where the scales were thickest. "For once I can do this," he told himself. The arrow surged, crackling with Philosopher's Stone energy. He strained to see the wound, tears in his eyes as memories he hated washed through him. "Die!" he hissed and loosed the arrow. The impact shattered scales. The basilisk screamed, the most tragic cry of the fight, and a gap opened along its flank. Loretta's greatbow had done what it promised. The shot punched through the supposedly indestructible hide. "He did it," Hermione breathed. No one spoke. Even Dumbledore, who might have taken a basilisk for a strange pet, felt a swell of pride. But the creature's vitality was fierce. "It's tougher than we thought," Amicus muttered, someone captured earlier watching in silence. Hermione didn't argue. The basilisk, though wounded, was not yet finished. Green, foul light pulsed from the wound like life refusing to be undone. Lockhart didn't stop. He held the bow, set another arrow, and fired. Flesh and bone tore open wider. The second blast exposed the thick ribs. The basilisk thudded down, but the eldritch green light kept knitting to sustain it. He knocked and fired again. The third struck true, the sound of something cracking, a sickly sharp snap of bone. The spine fractured. The snake writhed and fell. "As long as I don't sense its death, I won't stop," Lockhart told himself. He drew a fourth arrow despite the cold burning through his arm. The blast was colossal. The basilisk's neck snapped clean. Its head flew free from the body, landing yards away. The green necromantic light that Voldemort had woven into it finally sputtered and died. Organs and blood spilled. The stench rose and filled the canyon. "Quickly, go save him," Dumbledore ordered. At once, the Phoenix Fox burst into flame and dove down the cliff. 173. The Cup of Rebirth. The antidote and palliative, combined with your balm, stop the basilisk venom from spreading, Dumbledore said as he flew everyone down the cliff and examined the unconscious Lockhart. He let out a small, relieved sigh. Fawkes landed Basirs fell into the wound on Lockhart's arm, and wisps of white smoke rose where they touched. The hippogriff scraped its hooves restlessly nearby, anxious for its master. Fortunately, apart from this arm being unusable for a few months, there are no major complications. He simply overused magic. The White Wizard's assessment eased the group's paling faces. Of everyone injured in the trial, Lockhart had taken the worst of it. Neville was second, with a nasty, pus-filled bump on his head. That was no picnic, Harry muttered. If it weren't for that snakeskin, Professor might have had a much harder time. He had rushed up and kicked the headless basilisk as if it were an iron plate, unaware of Lockhart's fractured mind. He assumed the professor had been brave, not broken. It wasn't only the skin, Ron said, pinching his nose and edging toward the fallen monster. There was that green light coming off it at the end. If Hermione hadn't shot that bow like she did. He craned to peer at the basilisk's mouth, made harmless by the steel eye mask. Blimey, you could fit a dozen of me in there. Don't touch the teeth, McGonagall snapped, corralling her house. Basilisk venom is enough to keep you in bed for a week. She cleaned and dressed Neville's head with brisk competence. Dumbledore's brow, which had smoothed at his earlier diagnosis, knit again. What kind of experiment did Tom Riddle carry out to create power like this? To make servants and beasts share it? The restricted section would never have contained this. He had thought of Horcruxes, of course, but the Horcrux hypothesis didn't fit what lay before them. Horcruxes could anchor a soul, allow resurrection in a sense, but they did not make a thing unkillable in the way this basilisk had been. Look! Harry's shout cut through the spillation. He had found something dark and corroded in the creature's gullet, a small golden cup, pitted and frosted with green light. My! McGonagall's cry was sharp. With a swish of her wand, she whisked the cup out of Harry's hand and levitated it away. How dare you touch it with your bare hands? Her voice left no room for argument. She stripped filth from the cup with precise magic and held it up for inspection. Even now, the residue of Voldemort's magic clings to it. It is dangerous. Flitwick peered up from behind his spectacles. Could it be Hufflepuff's cup? It's very like the description in the book. Perhaps Pomona could tell us more, he added tentatively. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. It is the one. He did not have to say more. Voldemort had owned it. Hepzibah Smith's fate fluttered through the older man's expression. Another branch of Hufflepuff's line had been extinguished. Why would it be in the basilisk's stomach? Ron asked, fascinated despite the danger. He turned to the bound Death Eater, Amicus Carrow. Oi, you know what this is for? Amicus, who had been puffing up with the familiar arrogance of a Death Eater, shrank under the attention. He swallowed and, with a rough, hoarse voice, said what Harry and the professors feared. The cup of turning death to life, Severus's masterpiece, he rasped. With Lord Voldemort's aid, he altered the old Hufflepuff magic and fashioned it into a potions miracle. He called it that. Harry's lip curled. That coward? Snape? A miracle of potions? Hermione bristled at the insult. She believed, with the one eye she refused to close on Snape's character, that being named among the three great potions masters meant something. Flitwick and McGonagall examined the cup closely. Even McGonagall, who had never forgiven Snape for his ministry affiliations, had to admit to the cleverness of the construction. It's dark magic and other spells I can't name, Flitwick said, pushing his spectacles up his nose. But dark means were used as tools. Severus used incantations we generally categorize as evil to alter certain media. The dark magic is the method, not the intent. Ingenious in a horrible way. Amicus continued in his harsh whisper, eyes on the floor. The cup converts life into something that erases death, the green light you saw. When the basilisk swallowed life, that life was turned into a force that cancels death and pooled in its body. That light made it so hard to kill. Impossible, Harry shot back. Not even the Philosopher's Stone can truly erase death. It only postpones it. Mum taught me, there's no potion that can make death go away. Snape's tinkering with life and death aside, even the idea that a potions artist could design a vessel to channel life into anti-death force made the name Master seem warranted. Amicus's voice faltered. He avoided outright contradiction. Dumbledore watched him quietly, then asked in a lower tone, as much to test him as to prompt truth. Is this Voldemort's power? Did he provide this ability to Severus as he did to you? Amicus's face went pale. Fear, raw, animal, returned. He glanced at his sister, Alecto, lying bound and rendered immobile by McGonagall's body-bind charm. If I tell you how Lord Voldemort achieved this, will you spare our lives? He asked, trembling. Spare my sister and me. Dumbledore studied him. Turning to diplomacy, he let his voice be gentle. Do you mean simply not to kill you? Amicus's voice dropped to a whisper. Even permanent imprisonment, breaking our wands. Anything but death, I beg you." Dumbledore considered the family the boy named, the Carrows, who had, like many pure-blood houses, sought to hedge their bets with loyalties. He had noticed Amicus's evasive answers earlier. The old wizard had used legilimency briefly. He had found Amicus's mind surprisingly transparent, except for whatever secrets Voldemort had hidden elsewhere. He folded that into his choice. Dumbledore unbound one of Amicus's hands, took it, and said he would bind himself. "Minerva will witness," he added. McGonagall stepped forward and placed her wand across their joined hands. "I witness," she said, solemn. Dumbledore spoke then, with a care that made Amicus's eyes widen. "As long as Amicus Carrow reveals the secret of Tom Riddle's immortality," he intoned, "I, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, pledge that neither Amicus Carrow nor Alecto Carrow shall be put to death by me or by anyone acting for me, and that I shall prevent any ally of ours from killing you." The Carrow boy stared as Dumbledore said the words. Then he nodded with a shuddering relief. "I accept," he croaked. A thin tongue of pale fire curled around their hands and vanished. The unbreakable vow had been made. Even Dumbledore could not break it. Amicus exhaled as if released from a weight. Then, finally, he looked up with something like purpose. "You may speak," Dumbledore said gently. "I don't know the details either," Amicus said in a muffled voice. "Voldemort won't let us go down and look." Hermione's eyes narrowed. A thin blade of blue light sprang up along her staff. Amicus hurried on. "But he told us some. He shared the power with those who contributed." "Stop beating around the bush. Tell us now," McGonagall snapped. "It's the Well of Immortality. We made a contract with that well by—" He never finished. In the space of a heartbeat, Amicus's face went white with terror. He ballooned as if filled with air. A fierce green light shone through his body. Then he ruptured like an overfilled bag. The green light exploded outward in jagged bolts, striking everyone nearby. Dumbledore was faster than the light. With a quick motion, a silvery iron dome settled over Amicus's spot, and the green bolts hammered against it with crackles that sounded like thrown lightning. Fortunately, Amicus had not been particularly powerful. The flare was only one wave and faded. The two Death Eaters at his side were not so lucky. They disintegrated utterly, gone without so much as a speck of ash. "It's a contract like the unbreakable vow," McGonagall said, frowning. "Breaking it means death." Amicus had not known that himself. Before anyone could take that in, another scream tore through the canyon. Alecto, held under McGonagall's petrification charm, began to bloat and convulse. The petrification shattered under a wilder, more ferocious death force. The ugly woman swelled and then exploded as well. It all happened in the breathing space between two heartbeats. Dumbledore's attention was fixed on holding the silver dome. McGonagall waved frantically, trying to pull the students back, but there were too many children, and Lockhart no longer had the will to protect himself. Professor Flitwick, quick-eyed and precise, sent out a flock of tiny magical birds. Their numbers broke up some of the green bolts and kept the blast from becoming a massacre. Draco stood at the edge of the crowd, closest to Alecto. No one could reach him in time. He didn't even have a chance to react before a lance of death lightning came for him. Then, with a small, desperate pop, something blurred into being in front of him and shoved him aside, taking the bolt itself. It was Dobby. The green light vanished. The two Death Eaters were gone as if they had never existed. Only Dobby lay on the ground, struck through. Whether he lived was a question none of them dared to answer. "Oh no!" McGonagall moved to him at once and gently turned him over. "There's still a faint breath. This isn't the killing curse. At least, it's slower." She drew bottle after bottle from her robe, invigoration draught, blood-replenishing potion, dittany, antidote, poured them down his throat, and nothing happened. The potions did not stir him. His chest rose and fell, but life was draining away steadily, inexorable. Dumbledore came and looked with that pained gravity of his. "The essence is the same as a death curse," he said softly. "But without an incantation, without a master to cast it, it works more slowly. That also means it is harder to stop." Voldemort's refinement of death magic had reached a terrible height. His subordinates could be set to betray one another remotely, detonating a killing force comparable to Avada Kedavra. Draco, who had just been shoved down by Dobby, scrambled to his feet and crawled back across the stones. He grabbed Dobby's hand and looked up at Dumbledore with frantic hope. Fawkes fluttered in and let a tear fall into Dobby's mouth, but there was no revival. Dobby's breathing was faint and fainter. Dobby's eyelids fluttered open. "Little Lord, no, you don't want Dobby anymore," he whispered. Draco's face crumpled, tears streamed down, and with the clumsy, guilty anger of a boy who had been taught to hide softness, he shouted, "I don't want you anymore. Why did you block the death curse for me?" He hit the stone floor, skin tearing on the rough ground. "You're free. You don't have to serve Malfoy," he cried, shame and grief tangled together. Around them, everyone watched in sudden, stunned silence. Dobby still wore the little pointed hat Draco had given him, the sign of his freedom. He smiled weakly with those large, glassy eyes. "Miss Granger said freedom isn't only doing what you want," he breathed. "Freedom is being able to say no." He looked at Draco, earnest despite the pallor at his lips. "Dobby doesn't want Master Draco to die. Dobby says no to that future. This wasn't a contract. This is what Dobby wanted." A warmth like a hand on his chest came from the small, cooling limbs. Draco sobbed and clung to Dobby, letting shame and grief wash over him. His hair was damp with snot and tears, his robes filthy, but he no longer cared. He buried his face against Dobby's shoulder. "Dobby has the little master's hat. Dobby lives free in the wasteland." Dobby's voice was drifting. Dobby could feel the little master was in danger, he managed, pressing a trembling hand to Draco's cheek. Something blocked Dobby. Dobby struggled to get here. Dobby doesn't want the little master to die because the little master is kind. The words thinned away into breathy whispers. "I'm not worth you doing this for. Malfoy isn't worth you doing this for." Then Dobby's eyes rolled half-closed. The last syllables left him like someone collapsing after a long, heroic climb. No one spoke for a long moment. The whistle of wind through the canyon sounded like 1,000 small cries. In that hush, Hermione's mind bent to one impossible, urgent thought. The dewdrop crystals of the golden tree had the lingering authority of law. In that world, with those elixirs, anything short of destined death could be healed. There was no golden tree here. There were no dewdrops, no flask of wondrous physic. Then Hermione remembered, with a bolt of fierce hope, the cup of life and death she had taken from the basilisk's stomach, the little golden cup, scarred with green corrosion, that the professors had already tested and declared not to be dangerous. Snape's potion cup, though he had used Voldemort's power in it, what if it could help? She told herself the thought was bold, perhaps reckless, but there was no time for caution. "If you combine 2 kinds of dew as an elixir," she said aloud to no one and everyone, pulling the cup free from where it lay in the dust. "Phoenix Tear Plus, something made of death. Maybe it could reverse this." She took from her robe the crystal vial of a phoenix tear. Pure life alone won't reverse a death curse. You need life and death both combined. She looked up at the basilisk's enormous gaping skull nearby, and a sudden terrible laugh of triumph bubbled out of her. "The basilisk's venom, saturated with death. We can try to turn death into life." There was no time for precise calculations. There was no time to argue about ethics or theory. Hermione ran forward, ducked into the great open mouth, and searched along the outer edge of the fangs for the glands that held the venom. Her fingers were steady with urgency as she drew a single droplet and let it fall into the golden cup. She estimated the weight to match the phoenix tear, and then tipped the tear in. Her hands trembled. "There's no formula," she thought, "only determination." She whispered one last plea into the cup and sealed it with the shaking certainty of a girl who refused to lose another life when she could do anything to prevent it. 175. Resurrection Elixir. No, one person wasn't enough. Clutching the golden cup, she ran back through the crowd. In that short stretch of time, the 2 substances already inside had begun to react violently. Phoenix tears, brimming with life, and basilisk venom, steeped in death, boiled and hissed, threatening to burst the cup, yet were oddly confined by its rim, held in a tense equilibrium. Under everyone's bewildered stares, she knelt beside Draco and asked, solemnly, "How badly do you not want Dobby to die?" Draco stiffened at the question, then, after a beat, his eyes filled with tears. How badly did he not want the house elf before him to die? Before today, he had never taken those lowly creatures seriously. Even after his family fell and the name Malfoy became an object of scorn, he had never thought house elves, created to serve wizards, deserved respect. When Alecto had forced Dobby's true feelings into light, it had felt to Draco like a petty betrayal, like the dog I raised doesn't want to stay home. He had abandoned Dobby without hesitation, letting him fend for himself like a stray wolf dog. Lord Voldemort's cruelest mercy, in Draco's eyes then, had been to leave him to his own devices. But when Dobby had suddenly appeared and taken a fatal blow meant for him, Draco had seen the small, stooped, ugly creature find him in a moment of danger with nothing but a hat. He'd heard the rest of Dobby's unspoken heart. He didn't want to do harm. He didn't want to kill, but he loved his young master, loved the fragment of kindness left in Draco. He was a complete person, humble and brave and pure in a way many wizards were not. Draco realized, with aching clarity, that apart from his mother, the only one who truly cared for him was on the brink of death. "If you can't speak it, pour that wish into the cup," Hermione said gently. Draco could not find the words. Time allowed no hesitation. She took one handle of the cup. 2 drops at the bottom collided and seethed. This might be our only chance to save Dobby. Draco stared at the blackened relic, rust-flecked, pulled from the basilisk's belly. He didn't understand how it could help. Even the professors had no better answer. For someone struck by the killing curse, not dying outright was already a miracle. Could there be a way to reclaim a soul for death was already reaching for? But Hermione did not speak lightly. Everyone at Hogwarts knew her determination. Resolute, Draco reached out and took the other handle. The 2 of them knelt, lifting the golden cup together. "Pour your conviction, your determination into the cup, just as you shaped your own wand," Hermione intoned. "I'll guide the ritual. We'll shape a genuine life-reversing elixir." Draco closed his eyes. Images of Dobby rushed through him. He poured every ounce of his will, his urgent, desperate wish that Dobby live, into the cup. "Count me in, too," Dumbledore said softly. His aged hand rested on the cup's side. Though he was a ghost now, some bonds still crossed the line between life and death. Without further words, Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, then Harry, Ron, and Neville stepped forward and added their hands. Each touch laid another measure of conviction on the cup until the not small golden vessel was entirely covered. Everyone poured their will into it. An unexpected hand joined theirs. Gilderoy Lockhart stirred awake, his left arm dangling useless, but he forced himself to lift his right and support the cup's bottom. "As head of house, I ought to do something for my students," he said, tugging at a strained smile. Hermione suppressed a private smile. Lockhart's sudden recovery was likely only the product of extreme magical exhaustion. To Hermione's surprise, Gornock the goblin, who'd been standing to one side, sighed and stepped forward. "Count the goblins in," he said. Rumors often linked goblins and house elves as kin. Goblins rejected the idea, but both races had long suffered wizard scorn. The Ministry's old decision to place the Goblin Liaison Office under the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures had been an insult that fed unrest. Today, Gornock felt a rare equality from those gathered, even if the subject was merely a house elf. Perhaps Dumbledore was truly practicing his ideals, he murmured. Different, clawed fingers settled on the cup's rim. Determination flowed like tiny streams into the ancient vessel. The 2 liquids at the bottom responded, first a faint glow, then a swelling radiance, until the cup emitted a brilliant white gold light. As conductor of the ritual, Hermione felt the disparate wills unify, mingling with the phoenix tears and venom. Life and death braided and mediated each other. Snape's hidden enchantment began to operate, but more crucially the cup itself, a relic of Helga Hufflepuff, passed down for 1,000 years, and Hermione's guidance, based on the lore of the Forbidden Land, shaped the transformation. The 2 tiny drops swelled beneath that intense light, changing their nature into something else entirely. A milky, sweet-scented spring welled up, in a manner the wizard's present could scarcely explain. It bubbled and gurgled, growing until the liquid brimmed the cup. It was not so much a resurrection potion as an antidote to the death curse, an elixir capable of pulling back a soul that teetered on the edge. Those who had truly crossed into death, like Dumbledore himself, would not be redeemed by it. But someone in a near-death state, struck by the killing curse, yet not yet extinguished, might be drawn back. There was a severe limitation. It only worked on victims who had not died outright. Such cases were rare. The sort of injuries Dobby had suffered, caught in an explosion of Death Eater's magic, were not common. Hermione's mind flickered to other possibilities, the idea of drinking the elixir beforehand in battle, or inhaling it as a prophylactic infusion, but there was no time for speculation. Dobby might not have much longer. As the light faded, a full cup of milky white dew sat in Hermione's hands. Ignoring the startled, curious faces around her, she held it carefully and poured it toward Dobby. "Remember to leave a small sip," Dumbledore reminded them. "Hufflepuff's magic. This cup always overflows." 176. Hunting Snakes legend said Helga Hufflepuff had left a trace of magic in her golden cup. In the early days of Hogwarts, when supplies were scarce and food and water were short, Helga's cup could conjure fresh fare from the simplest ingredients. It could even replicate magical substances, although more slowly. Over half a cup of the resurrection elixir flowed into Dobby's mouth. Within a few breaths, the dull, deathly gray in his eyes brightened into something like life. His gaunt, ashen skin softened and regained its elasticity. The faint flutter of a pulse strengthened into a healthy heartbeat. "It worked. It really worked," Ron shouted. "This is a miracle. We've cracked the killing curse." Professor Flitwick's thin voice squeaked in astonishment. Even Hermione had not been confident before they began. There were too many assumptions, too many unknown steps. She had approached the synthesis of the elixir with the attitude of tending to a horse that everyone else had declared dead. That mindset makes alchemy fail, so she had pulled in more hands, more wizards, to focus their will on the task. The single most important contribution came from Draco. His belief had been the firmest and strongest. Even the professors, hesitant as they were, hadn't been able to shape the elixir with so pure a will. "From today, we have taken the first real step toward confronting the killing curse," Dumbledore said with a smile. Being able to save someone struck by the killing curse was fundamentally different from any defensive measure, an achievement of a wholly different order. "This should be written in the potions textbook," Flitwick added. "Will our names be in it too?" "We all helped," Harry cried, thrilled to have been part of something so momentous. McGonagall and Flitwick smiled as the children celebrated. Lockhart, lingering in the background, managed a weak joke about his next book selling better. There was still shadow in his eyes, but he seemed steadier than before. Perhaps having witnessed this, he would move away from the risky memory charms that had warped his life. Hermione breathed a long, satisfied sigh and handed the golden cup to Dumbledore. A small sip of the elixir still clung to the bottom. Dumbledore sealed the cup with a spell and sent it away in an instant. Dobby, propped in Draco's arms, blinked at the faces around him. Dobby did not die?" The pain of death's power did not vanish immediately. His voice was hoarse. "You should thank this little witch," Gornock managed, trying to stay calm. It was difficult. The killing curse, once an unforgivable curse, and anything that touched death's power had always been absolute. That a Hogwarts girl had helped save someone struck down by such a force was staggering. Give Hermione time to research, and perhaps she really could save people hit by the killing curse. "Is it Miss Granger, who saved Dobby?" Dobby asked, staring at Hermione. Hermione shook her head. "I only provided the plan. The ones who made this possible were Draco and everyone who put their will into it." Draco's eyes were red as he looked down at the tiny house elf in his arms. Dobby fit in his hands like a fragile thing. Although Draco had cried badly a little earlier, he was now too embarrassed to show tenderness. "You've paid everything back to the Malfoy family with one life," he said stiffly. "From today, your life belongs to yourself. Don't do anything for me anymore. Don't follow me or any of my family." His words were brusque, but everyone present recognized them as an awkward way of showing concern. "That's very moving," Flitwick whispered, dabbing his eye. He had always been overly sentimental. "Better than wandering in the wild," Dumbledore said, smiling. "Dobby, would you accept employment at Hogwarts? Would you be a Dobby who serves the children?" Leaving Dobby to his own devices after Narcissa's intervention had never seemed ideal. Draco might want to see him again. Keeping Dobby at Hogwarts would make that possible without any attachment or obligation. The school will pay you a salary. Outside your assigned duties, you will be free. Use the fireplaces, go where you want, and say no to any task you do not wish to do." Dobby's astonishment turned to joy. He had been a despised fugitive, abandoned after his master's fall, with nowhere to go but the wilderness. Suddenly, Hogwarts offered him a home. "If you're afraid of losing your freedom, we will never force you," Dumbledore added kindly. Dobby scrambled up. Dobby is willing. Dobby likes freedom. Dobby is not unwilling to work. "Don't use so much strength. You just recovered," Draco warned, helping him steady himself. "Very good," McGonagall said, smiling. "Everything seems to be settled." She glanced at the great basilisk corpse lying across the floor. "We've been here too long. The second years are still out in the wild. We must return quickly." Lockhart's face went pale with the memory of his group left outside. He cast a pleading look at Flitwick. In his current state, he could not lead classes. "And this basilisk corpse," McGonagall continued, "will need to transport it back for study and safekeeping. 1,000-year-old basilisk is valuable." "Wait," Gornuk spoke up. "I think I can make a deal." The goblin stepped forward, summoning courage. These wizards were from Hogwarts, perhaps the gentlest faction of the wizarding world. The goblins knew the name of the Order of the Phoenix, but had little direct interaction with wizards. "If you give me the basilisk's skin," he said, looking at Flitwick as if for support, "I can forge a weapon from the rest of it, a weapon capable of breaking through that immortality." Gornuk's meaning was clear. The basilisk's bones were steeped in the same death-tainted power that fed Voldemort's immortality. Combined with goblin forging, they might make something to counter it. Dumbledore considered the possibility. Goblin magic held secrets of its own, strange, powerful, and often inscrutable. "What do you need the skin for?" Dumbledore asked. Gornuk's face went grave. "Our secret realm is burning. The Coexistence faction's largest secret hall is being consumed by fiend fire. The fire eats everything. The skin of this basilisk can withstand fiend fire. We must wrap the secret realm with it to survive." Dumbledore could see the truth in Gornuk's words. Even aside from any bargain, preserving the Coexistence faction among the goblins was worth giving up the basilisk skin. And gaining a weapon to stand against Voldemort was an advantage he could not ignore. He turned to Lockhart. "Our defense against the dark arts professor. This is your trophy. What do you say?" Lockhart had no objections. He shrugged and muttered that a fang as a keepsake would do nicely, and Hogwarts could handle the rest. Hermione, suddenly alert, asked, "Who do your people consider the owner of Godric Gryffindor's sword?" The old dispute between goblins and wizards flared in the room. Goblins believed the maker, not the buyer, was the true owner of an item. That belief had long caused resentment. Goblins insisted that Gryffindor's sword belonged to the goblin who forged it and his descendants, not to Gryffindor himself, even if a wizard had paid for it. Would handing over the basilisk skin amount to payment, turning the forged weapon into a form of rent in the goblin sense? Gornuk had not expected Hermione to raise the question, but he understood immediately. Flitwick watched tensely, half goblin himself. He knew how deep goblin convictions ran. A misstep could ruin the deal. Gornuk gave a bitter smile. At this point, the Coexistence faction must learn to merge with humans. Clinging stubbornly to old values will only get us burned by fiendfire. His was the gentlest branch of goblins, only a little over 100 strong. Most were trapped in the secret realm and could not escape. This was a matter of life and death. "I can promise that our branch will not claim ownership of Gryffindor's sword or other goblin creations. As with human transactions, you pay and we work." Many goblins lived considerably longer than wizards. Some had memories of the war decades before, when the extermination faction had swept them along and the Coexistence faction had been silenced. Only after the worst was over had they regained any voice. Now, facing annihilation, Gornuk offered a rare concession. Hermione nodded, satisfied. "I have no problem with that." "Wait," Harry piped up, surprising everyone. "Can we visit your secret realm someday?" Gornuk blinked. He felt his years then. Young people thought very differently. Of course. The Coexistence faction has always intended to merge more with wizards. In practice, goblins already lived among humans, offering services, but the deeper merging of values and trust had not happened. This, Gornuk implied, might be a new beginning. That's fine with me too, Harry said, properly solemn as if he were party to a diplomatic agreement. We'll need the skin, the complete skeleton, the large fangs, both eyes, especially the eyes. The power within them is crucial, Gornick said. It will take months, maybe longer, to forge. Also, what kind of weapon do you want? Dumbledore turned his attention to Hermione, since she had said she would take on Voldemort in time. It made sense to ask her what she would feel comfortable using. A spear, Hermione decided at once. Only a spear can hunt a great snake. 177. The Voice of Return. The matter of the Verdant Gorge was finally settled. Dumbledore shaped a portkey from a stone and sent Lockhart, Hermione, and the others back to the castle. McGonagall and Flitwick went off to fetch the rest of the second years. Nothing else of consequence occurred, aside from Siamus blowing up the cauldron he had been transfiguring, so most people barely noticed the two professors' absence. Gornick presented Dumbledore with a special two-way mirror, enough to keep a connection open with the Goblin Enclave. If the coexistence faction survived this crisis, Hogwarts and the Goblins would likely cooperate more closely in future. Dumbledore, in a practical, almost casual way, had the basilisk skinned and handed the hide to the goblins. Their secret realm had been badly damaged and was dependent on Gornick's efforts to gather supplies. Rescuing it sooner rather than later was vital. The rest of the carcass would be brought back to the castle first. Fawkes was sent to inform the Daily Prophet. The eradication of a 1,000-year-old basilisk was good copy. Reporters would be expected to take countless photographs before the creature was dismembered for the goblins' forges. Besides the skin, the goblins wanted bones and eyes. The venom glands were to be removed, preserved by magic, and kept producing venom, one of the primary ingredients the golden goblet needed to synthesize the elixir of resurrection. The meat, gallbladder, and other tissues were entrusted to Lily, the potions professor, for study. The beast had mutated too far. It held high research value. When the huge, writhing, skinless carcass of the basilisk materialized on the Quidditch pitch, first years taking flying lessons nearly fell off their brooms. Madam Hooch, an excellent flyer, cast slowing charms to steady them in midair. Dumbledore levitated the carcass and hung it between the stands like a grim trophy. Students and arriving teachers, Lily among them, looked on in astonishment. The man who had been missing for days had returned with this startling prize. Lily learned, to her surprise, that the whole episode had been a staged trial involving Professor Lockhart, Hermione, and her son. Dumbledore apologized sincerely. He would write to the Weasleys and the Longbottoms for placing their children in unnecessary danger. Lily's response, however, was far milder than Dumbledore or Hermione expected. "When James and I joined the Order of the Phoenix, we knew our children wouldn't grow up in comfort," she said, her voice steady. "They'll be dragged into danger by the choices we make. I appreciate what you did. It was a rare and valuable experience for him to face Death Eaters directly. Still, you should have told me. I could have come and watched. Sometimes he's so hopeless in practical lessons it gives me a headache." "Hey, Mom, I'm really strong now," Harry protested indignantly. Hermione smiled at their exchange. The small domestic squabble sat oddly against the backdrop of the hall. Reporters, like busy sparrows, trooped down the fireplaces and crowded the pitch to photograph the carcass from every angle before reluctantly filing back into the Great Hall for Dumbledore's formal remarks. The house tables returned to their places, though the front benches were set aside for visiting dignitaries and press. Lockhart was in the hospital wing to recover, but nearly every other professor was present. Fawkes perched faithfully beside Dumbledore as the headmaster mounted the podium to face a packed hall. He began quietly, then with growing strength. "A gratifying victory. In recent years, the Green Flame Party has become a thorn in the side of our society. The clouds of fear hang heavy. Death arrives unexpectedly. Even our children face ubiquitous threats. Voldemort and the Death Eaters who follow him trample on human dignity and attempt to crush nascent hope with slaughter. The basilisk, Slytherin's legacy, was an ancient instrument resurrected for destruction." He let his gaze pass slowly over the assembled politicians. The foreign delegates watched intently, while representatives of the pure-blood elite from Malfoy Manor wore guarded expressions. Dumbledore's words were meant to be read on many levels. Hogwarts is flourishing again, he said, lifting his voice. That is precisely what Tom Marvolo Riddle fears. He was driven by the terror of death. He pursued all manner of means to escape it, even at the cost of his humanity. He could not bear to see the school he betrayed survive, so he plotted attacks, brought back the basilisk, unleashed Death Eaters to strike at our teachers and students. The hall murmured, quills scratched, enchanted cameras clicked. But their design has failed. Professor Lockhart has slain the 1,000-year-old mutated basilisk, and the Death Eaters sent to our gates were defeated by 3 second-year students. Dumbledore's voice filled the rafters. Hogwarts, its staff and pupils, has shown extraordinary strength. That strength will deter those who would see harm done. A roar of approval rose up. Ron, surrounded by his brothers, whooped it up and retold the tale breathlessly to whoever stood nearby, unaware that reporters were already angling for a quote. Dumbledore continued, grand and ringing. From now on, no wizard should fear waking to whose settlements have been breached by the gaze of dim, green eyes. One of Tom's arms has been severed. He can only hide in the forests of Albania and clutch at his fantasies of immortality. At Hogwarts, through our shared effort, fate and time favor justice. Our world will grow better. Our future will grow stronger. The hall erupted in cheers. Everyone rose, applauding the headmaster, the school, and the future he promised. Dumbledore steadied them with a raised hand and, smiling, announced, "Taking this opportunity, there is one more thing I wish to make public." Hermione exchanged a glance with McGonagall. Below, many of the visiting dignitaries stiffened. Dumbledore's tone was steady and resolute as he looked around the room. For 50 years, Hogwarts has weathered many trials. With today's achievement, I believe our professors and students are ready to shoulder greater responsibilities. Hogwarts will return to the Scottish Highlands, back to its original site. We will rebuild the 1,000-year-old school and continue its legacy. Silence fell. There were no cheers. The students were simply surprised. The visiting nobles and politicians were stunned. A Hogwarts return to Britain would shake up the balance of power, especially among the pure-blood families. Many present represented factions with competing ambitions. None wanted to see a new seat of influence rise on the British Isles. Those who knew Dumbledore's talents refused to meet his eye. A legilimens could read too much. The air thickened with unspoken calculations. Then Barty Crouch Jr. moved forward, eyes rimmed with red. "If Hogwarts can save my father," he said, "I will support your decision." A gaunt, black-robed wizard cut him off sharply. "Barty Crouch Jr., this is not your place to speak." His voice carried a thin, dangerous edge. It was clear that to save his father, Barty Crouch Jr. was prepared to put factional interests aside. Dumbledore's reply was blunt and decisive. "Caractacus," he said, addressing the interrupter, "Hogwarts' decision does not require anyone else's consent." Dumbledore's rare show of sternness had left the grand event with a bitter aftertaste. Reporters pushed and jostled through the flow network, desperate to be first with the explosive story. The politicians did not disperse, though. They clustered in the Great Hall in small, muttering groups, each hoping to catch Dumbledore alone afterward to discuss other matters. But Dumbledore had already left the school. He had gone to repay Barty Crouch Jr. for his decisive help earlier. When he learned that old Crouch had been struck by a curse, Dumbledore rushed over with the newly fashioned golden cup. He had been skeptical. Previous calls on the Crouch's misfortunes had turned out trivial, but this curse proved unusually severe, its intensity approaching that of Grindelwald's old magics. At first, Dumbledore suspected Barty Crouch Jr. had staged the incident himself, or that old Crouch had been plotting against Hogwarts. Now it was clear. There was an unseen enemy who did not want the Crouch family to thrive. He certainly had not suspected Barty Crouch Jr. of being in league with Voldemort. If Lucius Malfoy might seek power by cooperating with dark forces, there seemed little reason for someone in Barty Crouch Jr.'s position to do the same. His life had been easy, a father at the head of a major wizarding city, and at a young age, Barty Jr. himself already held real power as director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He was ambitious, clever, and a rising figure among the new generation of noble families. Why throw that away for a promise of false immortality? Dumbledore thought of the Carrow siblings' fates. If your side offered no legacy, whole families could vanish. In his eyes, Barty Crouch Jr. had been a typical Slytherin nobleman, someone he could tolerate and work with, even if they disagreed. What Dumbledore did not know until after the fact was that Hermione had altered the Hufflepuff cup into something new. The elixir she created, enriched with Phoenix Tear vitality and able to break death curses, was exactly what was needed. Dumbledore went to try it. Unfortunately, he returned alone. "We were too late," he said, voice heavy. The elixir of revival was strong enough to break the curse rapidly, but Old Crouch's body was already too damaged. The moment the enchantment broke, his bodily functions collapsed. He could not absorb the Phoenix vitality at all. That was grim news. Old Crouch's death created a power vacuum at Malfoy Manor. Barty Crouch Jr., despite his position and friendly relations with Hogwarts, lacked the accumulated influence to fill that void smoothly. He would likely be sidelined from the circle of power, and the factions under the surface at Malfoy Manor could erupt into open conflict. For a school that wished to rebuild and seek stability, this was the last thing they needed. Hermione, seated in a chair in the headmaster's office, shook her head. She had been invited to this meeting in her capacity as a member of the school governors. The office was full. Minerva McGonagall and the heads of the four houses, even Gilderoy Lockhart, who was supposed to be recuperating, lounging awkwardly in a soft chair. Professors Hooch, Quirrell, Trelawney, Ferenzi, and Kettleburn, Madame Pomfrey and Narcissa Malfoy, Filch in his stiff butler's attire, Hagrid, who had reduced himself in size, and several elective course instructors Hermione did not recognize. The portraits of past headmasters whispered together along the walls, excited at the news that the school would return to its original site. "I believe you all know that Hogwarts has decided to return to the Scottish Highlands, back to the homeland of this castle," Dumbledore said, looking around the room. "This is not a sudden decision. Minerva and I have considered it since the beginning of the year. But the road home will be thorny," he went on, his expression growing grave. "We will face obstruction from the nobles, the remnants of dangerous magic and radiation at the original site, and mutated creatures that await us. Even if we make the shores of the Black Lake again, keeping the school functioning will be a challenge." The professors exchanged glances. No one questioned Dumbledore's motives. He had never acted to harm the school or its people. He continued, candid and unflinching. "Coincidentally, Voldemort staged an attack on Professor Lockhart, information we uncovered in advance. We used it as bait and set a trap, waiting for Death Eaters and the Basilisk to walk into it. It was a trial. Our defense against the dark arts professor and several second-year students performed admirably. Had Minerva and I not been able to intervene from hiding, they still would have held their own. Their resilience surprised me." Lockhart managed a wry smile. Narcissa breathed quietly, relieved that Dumbledore had no intent to pursue Draco over the affair. Lily sat with visible pride. Her son had performed well in the trial, and she had asked McGonagall to restore the memory of it so she could see. "It was their performance that dispelled my doubts," Dumbledore said softly. "With such excellent professors and such talented children, what have we to fear? The road ahead will be treacherous, but our school and our students are hardy. What does not break us will make us stronger." He met every face in the room. "Hogwarts will cross the Dover Straits soon and return to the Scottish Highlands next academic year. There will be a fierce battle. Malfoy Manor may cut off our supplies. Pressure will come from every side, but we will endure. I am confident of that." Returning to the shore of the Black Lake was a dream often spoken of by the older generation of Hogwarts witches and wizards. The new generation grew up on those stories, curious about the scenery that had so haunted their parents and why they longed to see it again. If the castle could be returned to its original place, who wouldn't want that? Dumbledore's closed-door meeting had been a preview. From that day on, every professor had to be ready. Many difficulties were expected, and everyone at the school would have to do their part. No one objected or tried to back out. For the staff, Hogwarts was more than a job. The appointment letter had been a pledge of sanctuary, a haven in troubled times. They cherished the school and worked to make it better. It showed in their actions. From that day, the professors all busied themselves. In spare moments, they would leave the school, apparating to destinations up and down the network of fireplaces. Using their contacts and expertise, they prepared for the journey planned for the latter half of the year. For the students, life mostly returned to normal. They still had lessons to attend and homework to do. Almost nothing changed. Hermione buried herself in parchments, though she and her friends still discussed the recent extraordinary events. Some things, however, could not be so easily smoothed over. Professor Flitwick found himself teaching the Defense Against the Dark Arts class again. The real Lockhart, though mostly recovered, could not lift his left arm, and Madame Pomfrey insisted he remain in the hospital wing for at least a month. Without the charm and confidence that had masked him before, he could no longer wing the lessons. He stuttered, forgot what he meant to say, and fell back on nervously reading from the textbook. Since last year, I should get half of the Defense Against the Dark Arts salary. The half-goblin stamped his foot. Why, he protested, did the Dada professor always have accidents just when he was the most suitable substitute? Because of Lockhart's condition, outdoor practicals were canceled yet again. The mischief-prone students, led by George and Fred, kept finding ways to cause trouble, so Professor Flitwick and Lily improvised. They held a massive anatomy lesson in the Great Hall. They drew together every student from third year up and set about dissecting the basilisk corpse, a monstrous mass like a small mountain. While lecturing on the creature's biology, they put the pupils to work. Even with the outer hide removed, the basilisk's flesh was astonishingly tough. The students had to pour effort into cutting spells to separate it bit by bit. Outside the school, however, a different kind of chaos was brewing. The death of Barty Crouch Sr. had sent the wizarding community in the city into turmoil. Nobles moved from secret intrigues to open accusations and fights. Family feuds escalated into what looked like outright warfare. The seeds of disaster, sown when Lucius fell from power and the Malfoys weakened, had been kept in an uneasy balance by Old Crouch. With him gone, that balance collapsed. They could not even elect a new head of Slytherin. They could hardly agree on a new Speaker of the Council. Barty Crouch Jr. had been stripped of his offices and, aside from the title of head of the Crouch family, was now a nobody at Malfoy Manor. He was wise enough not to wade into the fighting. He used his father's funeral as an excuse to stay home and stay out of it. The Daily Prophet ran fresh, screaming headlines every day. Beyond Hogwarts, most reports detailed the mutual destruction among the noble houses. The Knott family, who controlled much of the press, exposed the scandals of their rivals with relish. The other families used their industrial and social power to retaliate in turn. They were, however, oddly united in opposing Hogwarts' return. Pansy Parkinson went so far as to say in an interview, "Dumbledore must be losing his mind. Returning Hogwarts is reckless. Everybody in Malfoy Manor knows the Scottish Highlands are a dangerous no-go zone now. Sending teachers and students there is like leaving their lives to chance." Malfoy Manor might reconsider aid to Hogwarts, another voice warned. The major houses cannot simply watch their investments go down the drain. Dumbledore paid scant attention to these veiled threats. Hogwarts pressed on, moving steadily toward Calais. In less than a week, the castle would be the closest thing to the French coast, only a little more than 20 miles in a straight line from Dover. Only one paper took a decidedly pro-Hogwarts stance. The Quibbler, run by Xenophilius Lovegood, who was also on the Devon Reconstruction Committee. He was not an order member, but was close to them. Hermione expected to meet him at the Burrow over the summer. As the castle skirted Old Paris, the students watched a ruined city pass beneath them, silent streets, smoldering black flames, one skyscraping tower blazing like a torch. A terrifying light emanated from it, constant and watchful. No one could explain why the Fiendfire had not been extinguished or why the Eiffel Tower had not collapsed into ash. Even so, despite the commotion Hogwarts made, the Wizengamot was unusually quiet. Grindelwald appeared unconcerned with Dumbledore's actions or the possibility of a new regional power. With no force coming to block them, the castle sailed on unhindered. Messages of congratulations and offers of assistance came in from wizarding powers across the globe. Using the increasingly popular Ghost Owl service, wizards from North and South America, Australia, and elsewhere sent their best wishes and asked if Hogwarts needed help. Dumbledore knew the school would not be isolated, even if Malfoy Manor cut off supplies. Other nations could and would provide aid. That help, of course, came with a price. Those distant powers were not purely charitable. Financial support would likely entail political strings. If Hogwarts could still maintain basic relations with Malfoy Manor, that would be preferable, but the current infighting among the pureblood families made it uncertain whether the city could function normally for much longer. One evening, Fleur sought Hermione out, her face serious and anxious. She knocked on the Gryffindor common room door and stepped in. Beauxbaton is willing to fully support Hogwarts' return, she said, then hesitated. But their price is the formula for the inciting spray. She flushed with shame at having to bring such a demand. As liaison, she had only to convey it. Hermione, head buried in a stack of parchment, chuckled without looking up. "Of course," she said. "If they weren't trying to take advantage of the situation, I'd start questioning the professionalism of their administrators." "Tell them," Hermione went on, "that the previous contract stands. If they want to be the first to tear it up, I will welcome it," Fleur finished, and for a moment their laughter hid the worry behind the words. 180. The Burnt Offering of Death. Using the pretense of mourning his father, Barty Crouch Jr. slipped away from the chaos of Malfoy Manor and, summoned by Lord Voldemort, found himself walking nervously toward the Bone Church. Dread tightened in his chest. The church was empty. None of the familiar Death Eaters were visible, not even Bellatrix or Snape. He stood alone before the well that emitted a sickly green light. "Come down." Voldemort's voice echoed up from the depths like death speaking itself. Barty felt his heart shake. Only two living things had ever entered that well and come back out: Voldemort and the basilisk, except the basilisk was dead now. Hogwarts had broadcast the news of the Chamber of Secrets so widely that even Muggles in far-off places knew of it. How could their lord not know? The Caro siblings who had caused this catastrophe were dead, yes, but Barty had not completed the task his father had assigned him. He could not be sure he would not incur Voldemort's wrath. And yet a command from Voldemort could not be disobeyed. He took a deep breath and jumped into the well, bracing against the radiation. For a moment, a thick green mist enveloped him. The air felt like it burned, and his skin prickled as if with heat. Then, after he passed through that poisonous layer, the vast space below the well was suddenly free of any lingering radiation. He hit the ground and staggered, disoriented. What lay beneath the well seemed like another world. Dark, slender rods rose like trees, each one bearing a corpse. Children and newborn magical creatures hung like pendants. At the top of each rod burned a steady dark green flame, like candlelight that refused to gutter. Those flames cast the only light in that place, painting the ground below with an infernal glow. Thick smoke from the burning rose and pooled above, forming that lethal green mist he had just passed through. Countless small flowers bloomed in the shadowed earth at his feet, pure white and almost translucent, thriving in this hell. Blood trickled from beneath each rod, gathered into rills that fed the flowers, and these streams converged and ran toward the highest throne at the center. There, seated on a throne of bones, Voldemort watched him without expression. Bellatrix and Snape stood below, also watching. Barty felt a curious relief at the sight. If his lord's most prized followers were here, perhaps he was not simply being led to execution. He hurried forward, prostrating himself on the ground in fear and contrition. "Lord Voldemort," he began, pressing his forehead into the cold earth, "because of my incompetence, I have failed to uncover Dumbledore's secret." He braced for a crucio, ready to bear any torture. But Voldemort did not lash out. His voice, when he spoke, was softer than Barty had ever heard it, almost kinder, and he did not rage over the death of the basilisk. That beast had been Slytherin's legacy. Many had admired Voldemort because of it. Barty had expected fury. "This is not your fault," Voldemort said quietly from his throne of bones. "Although you have made no progress this last year, I have seen your effort. You sought the most powerful curse from me and used it on your own father. That dedication moves me." Barty buried his head deeper. "To give everything to you, that was my intent from the beginning." Voldemort's voice tightened. "It is a pity, at the crucial moment, that Dumbledore killed the basilisk and found the golden goblet. And that woman, Lily, she must have twisted the goblet's magic, making that liquid revive the dead. Snape's tone was cool and dry. Her skill is not sufficient. It has happened, Voldemort interrupted, dismissive. Arguing about it is pointless. There was a flicker of self-reproach in him then. I made mistakes. I thought the Carrows, with the basilisk and the cursed object I provided, would kill Lockhart. I was careless. I overestimated you and underestimated Hogwarts. I still see this world with old eyes. That is my fault. What sounded like self-criticism sent the three kneeling servants into frantic apology. Lord Voldemort, it is our incompetence that has failed you, Barty cried, forehead still on the ground. Voldemort remained unmoved. He looked down at them, refusing to let them rise, and went on. I realize that hoarding the secret of eternal life does not make men serve me with whole hearts. After the Carrows were captured, they did not break under torture or veritaserum. They planned to betray me. So the contract took effect. They exploded, not even leaving dust. He rose from the throne, his dark green robes trailing like smoke as he passed the three kneeling figures. I discovered that most Death Eaters have merely traded loyalty for a promise of immortality. That is a transaction, not devotion. Loyalty cannot be bought. He turned to face them. You three are my most valued subordinates. I prefer to believe your loyalty is genuine. Therefore, you will be permitted to enter the well of eternal life and learn its secret. Bellatrix's breath hitched beside Snape. She had always been intoxicated by Voldemort's favor. Snape, as ever, appeared reserved, more curious than ecstatic. Voldemort spread his hands, displaying the small world beneath the well. As the rumors say, I first came to Albania to seek Ravenclaw's diadem. There I found a hidden goblin realm, this unremarkable well. Rise, don't kneel. At his permission, the three stood and looked around. What are the goblins? Where does their power come from? Can it transcend life and death and be made to serve me? I studied this at length, he said, a rare pride touching his voice. Ravenclaw's diadem aided my understanding. He smiled. Few besides me have ever examined goblin magic so closely. The ability to open a separate world within our world should not be wasted on mere concealment. His eyes roved across his forest of death. I drew inspiration from goblin power and slew every goblin in that realm, using their bones to build the first well of eternal life. I constructed a warped altar of radioactive waste and uranium rods, and I used newborn magical creatures as offerings, sacrifices to death. Death accepted the offering. I carved a hole in the present world, found a loophole in death, and used life for life, using others to replace myself. He sat again, unbothered by the horrified expressions around him. Therefore, I require a steady supply of newborns each year to replenish the losses from the sacrifices. The contract we hold with this well is what shares that loophole in death, so that you may exchange life for life. Anyone killed by the killing curse becomes a sacrifice who dies in your stead. His voice darkened with disappointment. I have gone to great lengths to preserve this gift, yet you have not helped. You fail again and again like worthless muggles. All you do is complain. Lord Voldemort, we have failed you. Punish us. Barty cried, his voice a mixture of fanaticism and dread. Bellatrix echoed him. Snape, however, stayed silent, a stone among the mourners. Enough, Voldemort said, almost impatient. There are many members of the Green Flame Party who will never be fit to receive this gift. You have merit, but merit does not automatically equal worthiness. He tapped the armrest of the bone throne slowly. I feel my power nearing a critical point. Perhaps soon I shall break the boundary between life and death and become a god who cannot be killed. When that time comes, the well will be useless to me. He looked directly at the three. Whoever may inherit this well, who may become the second deity beside me, will depend on performance. Bellatrix's eyes glittered. She had no real interest in immortality for its own sake, only the chance to remain forever at Voldemort's side. Snape's interest was more scholarly. This power offered a subject to study, just as he had used Voldemort's own gift to create the golden goblet that reversed death. Barty Crouch Jr. lifted his head, fervent. Lord Voldemort, I will redouble my efforts. I will find a way to infiltrate Hogwarts and observe its secrets long term. At his words, both Voldemort and Snape turned their attention to him.